Chapter 8:23. Sir, your guest is here. The curtain was lifted and a waitress poked her head out and said, "Invite him in." Otto Luashi took out a silver royal and handed it to the waitress beside him. "You don't have to do anything for now. I'll call you if I need you." "Sir, is this the hidden place you mentioned?" The man who came in took off his hood and looked around with a frown. "If it weren't for the Luashi guard standing outside, I would have thought that I came to the wrong place. It's not easy to invite you here. Of course, I can't just casually deal with you." Otto grinned. The visitor was Hillfox, a member of the envoy group who betrayed the trust of the King of Dawn, killed the Guardian Knight, and fled the city of Glow with his fallen minions. Appen Moya, the King of Dawn, flew into a rage when he found out that Yorko and his team had left without saying goodbye. He claimed that Grey Castle was openly provoking and despising the Kingdom of Dawn and that it was the witches who killed his father. He would never allow such evil beings to exist in his territory. Of course, Otto knew much more than that. For example, while Appen was searching for the witches, he sent a team of knights to chase after the emissary delegation. The order he gave was that apart from Yorko, the rest of the witches could be punished at will, especially those who dared to collude with neighboring countries. At the same time, King City also launched an investigation. Denise, a businesswoman who was close to the envoy group, was taken to the palace for questioning several times. Hill and the others who volunteered to stay as contacts seemed to have disappeared into thin air. It was not until a few months later that he received a message from Hill again. This was also the first time they met after their farewell. "Would you like something to drink?" Otto patted the soft chair beside him. "You don't usually have the chance to enjoy these things, do you?" Hill did not sit down but walked to the window and looked out. "This is the second floor. Where's the reliable escape route you mentioned in the secret letter?" The eldest son of the Luashi family sighed helplessly. He stood up and lifted the soft wooden board, revealing a dark hole below. "Slide down from here and you'll see the back garden. There's not only a secret door in the yard, but also a dry well. You can go anywhere you want. No one knows about this route. Of course, this tavern is run by the Luashi family." He spread his hands and said, "Lord Yorko was right to call you a fox. You're still as cautious as before. If I couldn't do this, I'm afraid I'd be hanging on the gallows now." Hill took out a coin and threw it down the secret passage. After listening for a while, he closed the plank. "If you want to tell me any news in the future, it's better to contact me through secret letters. It's not safe to meet like this. But it's also risky for me to communicate by secret letter. If the information in the palace is leaked, His Majesty Appen will first suspect the three big families." Otto sighed. He's no longer the friend he used to be. Hill raised an eyebrow and said, "So, what's the new move of the King of Dawn?" "He plans to attack the Church of Hermes to avenge his father." The eldest son of the Luashi family slowly told Otto the conversation he had heard during the court meeting. Although some ministers dissuaded him, His Majesty insisted. Now the city of Glow has begun to collect food. When the months of demons are over and the snow melts, the night group of the royal family will go to war with Duke Karb, who is in charge of the western wilderness. I was wondering why the price of porridge has increased by 1 copper royal recently. Fortunately, the Kingdom of Dawn is rich in resources. If it was Grey Castle, the Lord wouldn't have prepared for war during the months of demons if he didn't want to cause a riot, Hill said thoughtfully. "Did something happen to the Church of Hermes?" Otto knew why Roland was asking this question. Although the church and Grey Castle had fought a great battle in Coldwind Ridge and the news of the Holy City's defeat had spread, further information was that both sides had retreated to their own territories. All the ministers agreed that the church might have suffered heavy losses, but it was not completely defeated. Otherwise, the king of Grey Castle would have led his troops to the Holy City to loot it. As the core city of the church, there must be a lot of wealth there. It was probably because the god's punishment warriors brought by the pure witches had left a deep impression on Appen that he had stopped sending spies to gather information and had not taken any other action. Now that the situation had changed, it could only be that the other side had discovered something new. As for whether it was to avenge his father or to take advantage of the situation, it did not matter at all. His Majesty didn't disclose the specific information to us, but I heard from merchants returning from the west that there seemed to be a lot of refugees in the old holy city. Refugees. Hill touched his chin and nodded. I'll send this information back to Neverwinter. One more thing. Otto hesitated and said, last week in the court, the Foreign Affairs Minister mentioned Grey Castle. He said that Roland Wimbledon is not the real ruler of Grey Castle. He did not hold an enthronement ceremony, nor did he live in the palace. Even within the kingdom, there are many nobles who oppose him, especially in the eastern region. Since he tramples on the alliance between the two kingdoms, the Kingdom of Dawn needs to take precautions and contain him. For example, we should support the nobles to continue to resist the rule of Wimbledon. Oh! Hill suddenly became serious. What's the response of the King of Dawn? His Majesty didn't reply immediately, but judging from his expression, he seems to be very interested in this matter. Otto did not know why he told these things to Hill, or rather, to Roland. Judging from the current situation, the relationship between Grey Castle and the Kingdom of Dawn was deteriorating. He should be on Appin Moya's side, just like the Luashi family had been supporting the Moya royal family for generations. But he still could not convince himself to accept His Majesty's policy. Exterminating all witches meant including Andrea Quinn, who was by no means evil as Appin said. He had explained to His Majesty the relationship between the Church's pure witches and witches more than once, but in the end, it was in vain. Appin no longer regarded them as his arms. Otto also found that although he still called Appin Moya, Your Majesty, he did not have the respect he used to have for the old king. After thinking about it, he realized that he could not change the current situation of the Kingdom of Dawn and could only pin his hope on Grey Castle. In Neverwinter, he saw Andrea living a free life. In order not to break that life, he hoped that Roland's rule could continue. I see, Hill said in a low voice. Don't worry, this plan won't succeed. Chapter 8:24. She's doing well. She stayed on Sleeping Island in the fjords for a while, and now she's back in Neverwinter again. Hill smiled. I heard that Miss Quinn is very close to His Majesty's sister, Princess Tilly, so His Majesty won't mistreat her. From Hill, Otto learned that Andrea had become fond of playing cards and her marksmanship had improved a lot. She would bicker with another card player occasionally, but in general, they got along well. The news almost made him forget the passage of time. Until he heard an incongruous quarrel outside the room. What's going on? Hill stopped talking, walked quickly to the door, and looked out through the crack. Something seems to have happened on the first floor. Let me ask. Otto motioned for him to sit down, and then shouted at the door, Who's making noise downstairs? Go and see what's going on. Yes, sir, the maid who had been guarding outside the door answered. Maybe someone drank too much. He gathered the blanket around him. This kind of thing is not common, but as long as it is a pub, it is inevitable. You said that Miss Quinn participated in the Neverwinter hunting contest. What's the result? Hill did not answer. He just gestured for Otto to keep quiet and gently leaned his head against the door. After a few breaths, his face suddenly darkened. The people downstairs are not only wearing armor, but also holding weapons. What? Otto was startled. I heard the sound of iron boots and sword hilts colliding with the floor, tables, and chairs. Would anyone wear a full set of armor when drinking? Hill did not wait for the maid's report, but directly lifted the soft mattress. A drunkard doesn't like to play the role of a knight. Trouble comes to me. How could it be? Otto frowned. Please believe me, I definitely didn't. Of course, if I didn't trust you, I wouldn't have come here to see you, Hill interrupted. Then, let's make an appointment next time. You go first. If they really come for you, I'll help you. His heart was filled with regret. After this farewell, he did not know when he would be able to hear news from Andrea again. You're not coming with me? The man was slightly surprised. That group of people came with ill intentions. It's better for you to return to the territory first. Don't worry. I'm the eldest son of the Luashi family. They can't do anything to me. Otto shook his head. He didn't tell his father about rescuing the witches and secretly contacting Roland. If the troublemakers really came for the members of the diplomatic mission, it would be very strange for him to leave. At that time, even if there was no problem, it would become a problem. Although no one knows about this secret passage, it's not difficult to search it. When they see that there's no one in the house, they will inevitably be suspicious. With me here, you'll be able to evacuate safely. All right then, good luck to you. Hill did not insist. He let go of his hands and slid into the secret tunnel. Otto tidied up the sheets and bedding for him and lay back down on the soft couch. Not long after, the sound of heavy footsteps came from the staircase, mixed with the sound of metal rubbing, but the maid who went to inquire about the situation did not appear again. There was no knocking or questioning. The door was directly smashed open. A group of fully armed knights squeezed into the single room. What do you mean by this? Otto was furious. This is Earl Luashi's territory. Do you want to rebel? He was about to prop himself up and drive this group of rude people out of the tavern. Unexpectedly, they swarmed up and pressed him down on the soft couch. My apologies, Sir Knight. The one who wants to rebel is not us, but you. The leader of the knights shrugged. Although they were wearing gold-plated armor and had the emblem of the Royal Knight group on their chests, Otto found that they were all strangers. Damn it, where did they come from? Let me go. He twisted his body. You're slandering me. Say that to His Majesty Appin. The knight was not moved. You've betrayed his trust, sir. Hearing the name Appin Moya, Otto's chest suddenly turned cold. When he saw His Majesty again, it was already 2 days later. I heard that you haven't eaten for the past 2 days, and you've been clamoring to see me? Appin still looked a little tired. It had only been a short time, but the new king seemed to have matured a lot. His eyes flashed with a look that he was no longer familiar with. Now that your request has been met, can you eat properly? Where is this place? Otto grabbed the iron railing and asked in a hoarse voice, regardless of the pain, why did you do this? Where's my father? Are you not satisfied with this room? Appin looked around. The furnishings here are completely based on the standard of the Duke's mansion. Although it's a little small, there are beds, tables, chairs, and bookcases. It should be very comfortable to live in. He paused. As for where this is, of course, it's under the palace. Only by locking you here can I be at ease. Otto gritted his teeth. Your Majesty, I want to talk to you, but I didn't. Betray me? The King of Dawn interrupted him. Do you think I'll still believe these lies and continue to be deceived by you? It took me 2 months to find some clues about the witches, but I didn't expect you to be involved in it. You entrusted the ambassador of Grey Castle, Yorko, to participate in the auction at Black Money and helped him leave the city of Glow after the incident. If this isn't betrayal, then what is? His voice was getting louder and louder. Obviously, he did not want to suppress his anger anymore. That day in the palace, didn't you hear how the king of Grey Castle betrayed the covenant and trampled on my father's will? Do you want to talk to me about the betrayers or the witches who should go to hell? Appin's voice was full of hatred. Enough, Adaloshi. If you weren't my childhood friend, the eldest son of the 3 big families, you would have been sent to the gallows. I still need the power of the 3 big families, but it doesn't mean I'll need you forever. This is the last chance I'm giving you. Don't force me to take that step again. These words made Otto feel like he had fallen into an ice cave. He had never seen his playmate show such a ferocious expression. Thinking of those royal knight, whom he had never seen before, he suddenly understood something. Perhaps after the death of the old king, they had lost the trust of the new king. Chapter 8:25. Although it was still snowing, it was good weather for the northern region. Nail was wiping the gun barrel in his hand in boredom. Occasionally, he would look at the impassable mountain range through the telescope. But the frequency of looking at the impassable mountain range decreased as time went by. Now, he only looked at it 2 or 3 times a day. The rest of the time was spent on maintaining the gun and chatting with his companions. Maintaining the weapon was a meticulous job. Every half a month or so, they would receive a thumb-sized oil stick wrapped in hard paper. It was said that it was the waste grease left by the soap factory. When it was needed, They would first heat it up and then smear it on the special double-headed brush. The latter, with one end larger than the other, could be inserted into the gun barrel and the cartridge. In the past, each class was equipped with cleaning tools. Now, there were more and more factories and workshops in Neverwinter. Brushes had become a necessary accessory for guns. Almost everyone had one. Of course, if there was no campfire, they could also keep the oil stick warm by putting it in their arms or in their mouths. Although the First Army forbade the consumption of this waste grease, some soldiers would still secretly smear a little of it on their rations and eat it with relish as a seasoning. As the squad leader, he usually chose to turn a blind eye to it. After all, the team responsible for guarding the northern region were mostly veterans, some of whom were even 10 or 20 years older than him. If he had not attended the universal primary education class, he would never have been the squad leader. Looking at those former neighbors, uncles and uncles, Nail could only smile. After assembling the disassembled parts one by one, the rifle became shiny again. He pulled the trigger several times to make sure that the empty bullets were fired normally. Then he moved his eyes back to the position. The battle in autumn was still etched in his mind. Whenever he closed his eyes, the image of the young woman in the red robe would appear in his mind. At that time, he had witnessed her death in this blockhouse. Even though he knew that she was an enemy and a pure witch of the church, the scene of her struggling in the hail of bullets still made him feel very uncomfortable. If it were not for Iron Axe's order and his loyalty to His Majesty, he would have left the army and returned to his original job as a mining steam engine operator. Although he still stayed in the First Army, Nail decided to transfer from the machine gun team to become an observer to protect the machine gunners. Even though he knew that his actions felt like he was deceiving himself, he still couldn't overcome the barrier in his heart. After a bloody battle, the ground was soaked in blood, and there was no longer any trace of it. The barbed wire had long been removed, and only a dozen or so wooden stakes were left. The trenches were also filled with snow. If it were not for the few blockhouses still standing, the wilderness would look no different from the surrounding land. Other than them, no one knew that several hundred meters in front of the first row of stakes, more than 2,000 people lost their lives here. "Corporal, the stove is running out of firewood. I'll go and get some from the field," said a soldier who was about the same age as Nail. He was referring to the stakes that had been used to fix the barbed wire. "Otherwise, the next group will blame us for not replenishing the firewood." "But we're on duty now." Nail shook his head and said, "It's not good to be seen by others. They won't say anything." Another veteran laughed and said, "It's so cold. Who cares if we go and get something to warm ourselves up? Besides, it's been several months, and we haven't seen any of those cowards from the church. How could they come to us at this time?" These words were unanimously echoed by everyone. Nail also knew that they were right. In the beginning, there were still 500 people in the camp. According to Iron Axe's request, they continued to stay at the foot of Coldwind Ridge to guard against the dying counterattack of the church or the invasion of demonic beasts. However, none of the expected enemies appeared. Probably because the higher-ups thought that the situation would not change much. More than 200 soldiers were withdrawn. The remaining soldiers were basically in the form of patrols, taking turns to stay in the blockhouse to monitor the movements in the northwest. He hesitated for a moment and finally agreed to the soldier's request. "It's too slow for you to move it alone. Call 2 more people to go with you." The latter whistled and said, "Yes, boss." Nail turned around and picked up the telescope to look at the end of the snowfield. It was still white as far as his eyes could see, as if it would never change. Just as he was about to take out his pistol and wipe it, 2 or 3 black spots suddenly appeared in his field of vision, which were particularly eye-catching against the white background. He was startled for a moment and then shouted, "Wait!" The soldiers who had walked to the top of the stairs immediately stopped, and the others around the stove also gathered together. "What's going on?" Nail wiped his glasses with the felt on his collar and looked to the northwest again. This time, there were more black spots. He held his breath and observed for a while, only to find that they were figures moving slowly in the snow. "Sound the warning horn. Someone is coming to the position." Woo 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 woo. As the horn sound spread over the field, the whole camp suddenly boiled up. Nail took his rifle and went down the blockhouse with his team. They formed a line of guns around the bottom of the tower and put the barrels on the sandbags covered with snow. Since the trenches had been filled with snow, they could only shrink the line and assist the heavy machine guns to defend. "Are they from the church?" someone asked. "If not them, who else could it be?" The previous veteran muttered unhappily, "Cold Wind Ridge has long been abandoned by His Majesty. Only Hermes can come from that direction. I underestimated them. Will there be another bunch of monster-like soldiers? This time, we don't have the support of the artillery battalion. What are you afraid of? I don't believe they can run around in the snow." The veteran spat. "Either you don't wear armor or you fall into the pit and become a target. Boss, the distance?" "At least 1,000 meters away." Nail looked at the suspicious targets and could not help but frown. "Strange, something is wrong." "What's wrong?" "They don't look like the God's punishment army. Did the church send the judgment army here to die?" Everyone was relieved. If they were just ordinary judgment warriors, it was absolutely impossible for them to rush to them under the crossfire of the machine gun blockhouse. "They are not the judgment army either. Not only are they not wearing armor, but even some of their clothes are intact." Nail raised the telescope and was surprised. "My God, how did these people come down the mountain? They look like a group of refugees." "They could also be scourge disguised as refugees." The veteran shrugged. "Hey, where are you going?" Chapter 8:26. When he approached the front of the camp, he no longer needed the telescope to see the refugees clearly. There were men and women of different ages. Their clothes were tattered, their steps were slow, and their bodies were weak. They looked even worse than ordinary militias, let alone the judgment army. Nail was even more convinced of his judgment. However, he also knew that the church had a kind of secret medicine that could instantly enhance their strength. Considering that the enemies might use berserk pills, he asked his teammates to set up the gun barrels within the suppressive range of the heavy machine guns. Then he stepped forward and shouted, "This is the border defense line of the Grey Castle Kingdom. No one is allowed to break in. Stop right now and stay where you are. Otherwise, we will open fire." The group of people had obviously seen him as well, and their faces were filled with excitement. Not only did they not stop moving forward, but they also quickened their pace. Nail fired 2 shots into the air and repeated the warning, but it was useless. "Nail had come back." The veteran shouted behind him. "They don't know what a gun is. They won't stop even if you shout yourself hoarse." Nail's heart skipped a beat and he hurriedly shot arrows instead of shooting. This time, the refugees finally responded. However, they only hesitated for a moment and then continued to march toward the position. This time, they even waved their hands to the First Army and shouted something while running. The shouting was so noisy that he could only vaguely tell that they were asking for help. "No, stop." Nail made the last attempt until he was dragged back to the defense line by his teammates. When the refugees crossed the first row of stakes, the 2 blockhouses burst into flames almost at the same time. The bullets whistled over Nail's head and fell around the stakes, stirring up snow columns and completely drowning out their shouts. A mist of blood suddenly rose in front of the crowd. This time, they finally stopped moving forward. Nail saw that in addition to the refugees who had been swept down, the rest of the people knelt down one after another and prostrated themselves in the snow. Despite the fear on their faces, they did not flee back, as if there were more terrible things waiting for them behind. "Stop! Stop shooting!" Nail took off his coat and waved it in the direction of the blockhouses at the risk of being hit by stray bullets. It took him a lot of effort to make the machine gun squad release the trigger. Probably because they noticed his strange actions, another 2 squads left the blockhouse area and surrounded the front line. Passing through the smoke-filled position, a squad of 5 people followed Nail and slowly approached the strange guests, who were shivering all over. Even though it was freezing in the snow, they did not dare to move. "Where did you all come from?" No one responded. "Didn't you hear the squad leader's question?" The veteran yelled. "If you don't answer, you'll all be hanged like spies." Sir, said someone at last. We are all from Hermes. So you are believers of the church? Nail frowned. Yes. No, we are not. The man kowtowed again and again. We were deceived by the church in the past, but now we have realized our mistakes and turned over a new leaf. God doesn't protect the church at all. It's our fault. Please give us something to eat. This sentence immediately caused an uproar in the crowd. Sir, please, just a mouthful of oatmeal will be enough. My child is dying. The army of the church is chasing us. We have to throw away our luggage. Sir, I haven't eaten anything for 3 days. So they would rather be shot by machine guns than run away? Looking at their haggard faces and more than a dozen corpses with hot blood flowing out of them, Nail felt sorry for them. After escaping from Holy City, going to Grey Castle was probably their only way out. He took out the dry food from his waist pocket and was about to throw it to the group of people, but the veteran grabbed his wrist. What are you going to do? Give them something to eat. Are you sure? These guys are from the church. The veteran lowered his voice and emphasized, they are our enemies. But now they are not. Didn't you hear that? They admit that they have been deceived. TSK, deceived? The veteran said disdainfully, when they can't survive, they will even worship the devil as the true God. Compared with the Judgment Army, these guys are just fence-sitters. Chief, Uncle Sang is right. Maybe the weapons and armors used by the army of the church were made by them. God knows whether they have the blood of the first army on their hands. They deserve it. Who asked them to go against His Majesty? I don't want to give them food. Nail took a deep breath and gestured to his teammates to be quiet. Listen to me. Before His Majesty came to Border Town, you should know what the situation was like in Border Town. At that time, everyone was more or less deceived by the church. But His Majesty didn't give up on us, nor did He regard us as fence-sitters. Should we spurn them now? Of course, I'm not saying that we should let those who have committed crimes go. Giving them food first and then taking them back for interrogation is the right thing to do. This. And His Majesty once said in the book that the kingdom of Grey Castle is a whole. As long as they are innocent and are willing to submit to Grey Castle, they should be regarded as the king's subjects instead of being persecuted and ostracized. Nail said in one breath, if there are innocent people among them and we don't help them, won't we go against His Majesty's will? After a moment of silence, the veteran grinned and said, Nailhead, I finally know why Sir Blair elected you as the captain. Those who have been educated are indeed different. In the past, you were the one who couldn't even speak smoothly at critical moments. If Ironhead knew about this, he would definitely applaud you. Obviously, he did not agree with the statement that all those who submit to Grey Castle are subjects. However, all the soldiers in the First Army respected His Majesty Roland Wimbledon and naturally did not want to oppose Nail's decision. But we can't throw food to them directly. That will only cause a fight. Pick out a few who can't stand it anymore and ask them to line up for food. As more and more soldiers surrounded them, Eagleface, the deputy battalion commander in charge of the garrison in the northern region, also arrived at the front line. This tall man with round eyes and a pointy mouth resembled a gray eagle from the western region. Like Iron Axe, he was also one of the first outstanding hunters to join the militia. Who can explain to me what's going on? Nail stepped forward and gave a military salute, briefly telling him what had happened. Escaped from the Holy City? Eagleface revealed a thoughtful look after hearing this, and then asked his men to bring a refugee to him. What happened in Hermes? If you can tell me everything in detail, I can let you fill your stomachs. Sir. The refugee swallowed and said, the cathedral of the new Holy City collapsed. What? Nail was stunned. Even he had heard that the Cathedral of Hermes was the immortal symbol of the church. Before His Majesty's miracle building was completed, the Tower of Babel had been the tallest building built by human beings. At the beginning of the battle in Coldwind Ridge, he had fantasized about following His Majesty into the Hermes Plateau and occupying this legendary tower that could reach the sky. But this magnificent building actually no longer existed? I heard that there was a big pit under the church and the whole tower had sunk in. The refugee said intermittently, The judgment army blocked the scene, but such a big building disappeared without a trace. Coupled with the earth-shattering noise, everyone knew what had happened. The church is going to be finished, my lord. God no longer cares about the church. The residents in the periphery have begun to secretly escape. We were a little late, and as a result, we were chased by the judgment army. Out of hundreds of people, only we escaped. So, the holy city is in chaos. Chaos, chaos. The man nodded and said, not only the west gate, but also the south gate and the east gate are open. Obviously, the guards guarding the gate have all run away. I heard that the situation in the old holy city is worse than that in the new holy city. I haven't seen a caravan enter the city for a long time. I see. You can go now. After his subordinates took the man away, Eagle Face looked excited. This is unexpected good news. Maybe we can take down Hermes before the arrival of the army. Nail naturally knew why the deputy battalion commander was happy. If he could become the first commander of the first army to enter the holy city, he would undoubtedly add a great achievement to his resume. But at this moment, he did not care whether he could gain more military exploits. What he cared about was the refugees suffering from hunger and cold. After expressing his concern, Eagle Face took a deep look at him and pondered for a moment before replying, "The camp can't take in these outsiders. Give them some tents and food, and let them camp in a place where the heavy machine guns can see." Is it on this barren plain? Nail's heart sank. If the weather changes, such as heavy snow or a storm, I'm afraid they can't survive one night. Chapter 8:27. Tucker and Thor climbed the thick walls of the new holy city and slowly walked to the mottled battlements. This was probably the most tranquil months of the demons that the stronghold had experienced since its establishment. In order to resist the attacks of demonic beasts, no matter how heavy the snow was, there would be people cleaning and de-icing. Therefore, the city wall always maintained its unique blue-gray color, which was particularly eye-catching against the white background. But now, he left a series of footprints in the flat snow. There were no potholes on the stone pavement, and there were no bloodstains in the cracks. All the traces of the battle were covered by the snow, as if nothing had happened. This would have been an incredible scene in the past. But there were so many changes recently that this inconceivable scene was not so surprising. They thought that the holy city of Hermes would be trampled to the ground by the wave of demonic beasts, and all the believers were ready to live and die with the cathedral. But they did not expect that there were only a few enemies in the snowfield, and they did not even have the intention to climb the city wall. Before they had time to celebrate, God showed his impermanence in the most cruel way. Because the conquest of Grey Castle consumed too much of the church's power, the first task after winter was to re-elect the 3 archbishops and the corresponding high-level personnel. In order to stabilize the order of the holy city and restore the believers' faith in God, many young believers became the backbone of the church. Thor also became one of the interim archbishops because of his previous identity as the Chief Justice. However, just when the situation was slightly better, the cathedral suddenly collapsed on a windless night, and a group of high-level personnel fell into a deep pit in the ground. In an instant, everyone's feeling of survival was crushed. Thor happened to escape the disaster because he was patrolling the camp. No one knew how it happened. Although they had heard that there was a fire in the core area of the cathedral and that it was invaded by demonic beasts, without the permission of the Pope, they could not enter the pivotal secret agency, even if the acting Pope Typhon was missing. It could be said that the collapse of the Cathedral of Hermes had a more serious impact on the church than the crushing defeat of the army. The army's defeat could be attributed to the commander's fault, or it could be attributed to the enemy being too cunning. However, the Tower of Babel, which represented the unyielding will of the church, was the symbol of the spirit of the church. Its collapse was equivalent to God abandoning the church. When people's hearts were wavering and the situation was precarious, such an unforeseen event had almost become the last straw that broke the horse's back. Even if he had sealed off the scene immediately, it would be of no use. The residents of the holy city began to flee from Hermes. First, it was a small number of craftsmen and merchants who did not have strong faith. Then it was the outer city, the inner city? Fear spread like a demonic plague, but there was no antidote that could stop it. He once organized all the Judgment Army and the priests to hold a devout prayer on the city wall, hoping that God would once again look at the last fortress of mankind and not let the thousands of creatures behind it be swallowed by the evil power of hell. However, he never received any response. Tucker still remembered the teachings of Pope Maine. If you want to fight against evil, you can only rely on strength. But apart from praying to God, he could not think of any other way to stop the collapse of faith. Your Excellency, so you're here. Suddenly, a woman's voice came from behind him. The troops chasing the fugitives have returned, but some of them have already dispersed, right? Roland turned around and said softly. The one who reported was the surviving commander of the Judgment Army, Farina, who had taken over his mission. On her face, Tucker saw a somewhat familiar shadow. After thinking for a moment, he remembered the warrior of the advance camp who had sacrificed herself for the church. Alicia was one of the few female judgment warriors. They both had the same unswerving character. Alicia was able to persist in fighting when more than half of her teammates were dead or injured, and when the demonic beasts approached the walls of the cathedral. Alicia took over the heavy responsibility of commanding the Judgment Army when the church was on the verge of collapse, and tried her best to keep the situation under control. Yes, Farina angrily stamped her feet. Those new recruits were simply useless. There were more than 20 of them when they went out, but only 1 or 2 came back. Even if they neglected their training, they couldn't have been killed by the fugitives. If I find them, I'll definitely teach those traitors a lesson. It's inevitable. Tucker sighed. How many Judgment Army soldiers are left? 564 of them. They're now guarding the gate of the inner wall of the Holy City. They should be able to prevent the residents of the inner city from escaping. In addition to the hundreds of God's punishment army soldiers who were not trapped in the ruins of the cathedral, these were the last elites of the church. Roland clearly knew that it was impossible to stop the demon's attack with just these few people. The destruction of the human race was already a foregone conclusion. Regarding this extremely powerful enemy, he had heard from His Holiness Maine. All the efforts of the church were to protect the human race when the doomsday came, so that the fire of continuity would not be extinguished. That was why there were such powerful warriors as the God's punishment army. But this alone was not enough. Before the arrival of the war, the church must unify the 4 kingdoms and integrate the power of the entire human race to have a hope of winning. Now that there was no hope left, what was the point of everyone still holding on to this plateau stronghold? There was indeed not much he could do, but for these more than 500 people, it might be a kind of relief. Let's go to the east, Tucker said. Whether to the kingdom of Everwinter or the kingdom of Wolfheart, try to get as close to the coast as possible. We can build the new holy city there. In this way, even if the demons attacked the 4 kingdoms, you could take a boat from the port and escape to a farther place. If you're lucky, you can live a safe life before the destruction of the human race. Leave the Hermes? Farina was stunned. But Your Excellency, if we leave, who will fight against the demonic beasts? If the demonic beasts enter the hinterland of the mainland through the Big Gap, it's also a crime committed by Grey Castle. The church's top priority is to preserve its strength. The cathedral can be rebuilt, but the believers can't bear the loss. When the demonic beasts become a disaster in the 4 kingdoms, people will remember our strength again. The demonic beasts don't matter at all. They're not the real enemy. The fatal threat comes from the depths of hell, and you can't do anything about it. The last thing I can do is to keep you away from the battlefield as much as possible. In order to protect the human race, you've done enough. Farina frowned and said, Those who are determined to stay here are devout people who are willing to live and die with the holy city. I'm afraid they won't agree to abandon the Hermes. The holy city is where you are now, child. They'll agree as long as you persuade them. Tucker paused for a moment. And this is also the order of the acting pope. Protect yourself and continue the church. Do you understand? The refugees would soon spread the news, and at that time, the king of Grey Castle would probably be ready to make trouble again. I understand, Your Excellency. No, Your Holiness. Farina bit her lip, clenched her fist in front of her chest, and bowed to him. At this moment, the gray sky suddenly had a touch of dusky yellow. He turned around and saw a crack in the clouds. The orange-red setting sun was slowly revealing itself, casting rays of light onto the pure white snowy plains. This is the end of the months of demons? Farina showed a hint of joy. Yes, the snow will melt soon. Let's hurry and tell everyone. If we start preparing now, we can leave in 2 or 3 weeks. Yes, then I'll take my leave. She nodded and ran toward the inner city. At this moment, the bell that announced dusk came from the holy city. The 9 bell tolled not only to announce the time, but also the time when the believers closed their eyes and prayed to the gods. But Tucker and Thor did not pray, because the gods could no longer hear them. He took off the crown on his head and put it on the battlement. Then he climbed up the city wall and looked at the sunset in the distance. If he wanted these people to completely abandon the Hermes, he still had one more thing to do. But Tucker did not mind because in this way he could stay with his companions who had fought side by side. This dusk was not only the sunset of the church, but also the sunset of all human beings. He closed his eyes and leaned down. Farina heard a slight crash behind her, as if something had slipped into the valley. She looked back and saw that there was no one on the city wall. Chapter 8:28. This time, the months of the demons lasted for nearly 5 months. When the dark clouds dissipated and the warm sunshine reappeared over the western region, spring was already half over. An urgent task was placed in front of Roland. That was spring plowing. Launching a war to conquer the southernmost region during the months of the demons, when other forces found it difficult to move forward, would save a lot of time and enable them to carry out the unified strategy with ease. However, it would also consume a lot of food. Due to the rapid population growth, the border area's granary was empty for the first time. Roland secretly felt lucky that the first thing he did after annexing Longsong's stronghold was to hand over the Golden One's seeds cultivated by Leaf to Perot and order him to promote the improved crops. Otherwise, the months of the demons would be really difficult. The cement ships that traveled between the border area and Longsong's stronghold formed the lifeline of the First Army. A large number of wheat-ground pancakes were distributed to the soldiers fighting in the front line by shipping. Therefore, the day after the Victory Day celebration, Roland held a spring plowing operation conference. Not only the Ministry of Agriculture, but also the entire City Hall, including the second-class officials of the Longsong area, the District Governor Perot, and the Fallen Dragon Ridge Governor Spear were all summoned to Neverwinter Castle. Among them, Spear Passy was flown here directly by Maggie. When she landed, her cheeks were pale, and when she saluted Roland, she complained a lot. Car Kant, the Lord of the Northern Region, was represented by his daughter, Edith, and his second son, Cole. Roland did not know if it was an illusion, but he felt that the Pearl of the Northern Region, who had just returned from the Great Snow Mountain, was more radiant than before, while Cole, who was behind her, seemed much weaker. And that outfit, was it a little too neutral? Anyway, the conference had gathered representatives from all over Grey Castle. Except for the Eastern region, which had not yet surrendered, and the Central region, which had not yet established the City Hall system, this could basically be regarded as a national conference. He looked around the hall with satisfaction and then knocked on the table. Everyone quietened down and looked at the king. "I know you must be wondering why the word war is used on the banner," Roland said, pointing to the red cloth banner hanging on the wall behind him. "Because this is a war." It was not only related to the successful implementation of this year's strategic plan, but also determined the validity of Neverwinter's rule. When I first roped in the refugees, I promised them that as long as they were willing to work hard, they would never go hungry. I've done this in the past 3 years, expanding my territory from a remote border town to more than half of Grey Castle. There's no reason I can't do it this year. The kingdom will only be stable if the people don't have to worry about food and water. Therefore, I ask everyone to take spring plowing seriously and complete this year's plowing according to the regulations and sowing manual formulated by the Ministry of Agriculture. He paused for a moment. From this year onward, agricultural work will be subject to a special assessment, including the reclaimed area, the number of farmers, and the agricultural output. These will be the criteria to determine whether you are suitable to be a governor. Looking at the bewildered faces of the participants, Roland could not help but smile. It doesn't matter if you don't know what these assessment items are. Later, the Minister of Agriculture, Sirius, will spend a day explaining them to you in detail. In short, if you can't meet my requirements, it means that your ability is limited and you are no longer suitable to be a governor. Although no one said anything, it was obvious from their expressions that they were obviously nervous. This was the effect Roland wanted. Abolishing the aristocratic system, apart from being able to take back the feudal power, also meant that the officials of the territory would no longer be hereditary. He did not mind these people enjoying the benefits, but he would not allow them to hinder his development plan. And the agricultural assessment was just the beginning. Roland lifted a curtain behind him, revealing a number written in big red letters. In the first year, other standards can be relaxed, but in terms of agricultural output, I want you to meet this number. Everyone sucked in a breath of cold air. 50,000? Roland was not surprised. After all, according to the average level of this era, the annual harvest of an ordinary city was about 10,000 kilograms, and the harvest of an important town like the Old King's City could reach 15,000 kilograms. When Border Town used the golden ones for the first time, they had only collected a little more than 7,000 kilograms, which was already an astonishing harvest at that time. Of course, the actual harvest of each region was closely related to the area of farmland and the number of farmers. Unlike Border Town, which developed high-yield agriculture, big cities relied on the barbaric cultivation of tens of thousands of farmers in the surrounding villages and small towns to obtain so much food. That was why Roland included these two items in the assessment. After all, the fewer the farmers, the more workers the factories could accommodate. Roland gestured for everyone to quiet down. In fact, when you see the experimental field of golden twos, you'll realize that this goal is not just a fantasy. After Leaf's repeated tests, the unit yield of golden twos can be more than twice that of golden ones, and the ears of wheat in the field can crush the stalks. This time, it was Perrault's turn to exclaim, "Your Majesty! Can it really be more than twice that?" Among the officials from other cities, he was the only one who was deeply impressed by the amazing yield of golden ones. During the War of the Months of Demons, the Longsong area had provided more than 50% of the First Army's rations because there was a large amount of surplus food after golden ones were planted. If it were ordinary wheat, it would not even be enough to feed a city. That's true, but golden twos aren't completely flawless. Roland looked at Leaf and said, "Miss Leaf of the Witch Union, please explain its characteristics in detail." Leaf nodded and bowed to Roland. She walked up to him with a bag of ripened wheat and began to show golden twos to everyone. "It's different from all the wheat you've seen before. It can only be planted once, so you have to come to Neverwinter to get new wheat seeds every year. I've also greatly strengthened its root system so that it can absorb nutrients from deeper underground. However, it consumes a lot of fertility and needs to be fertilized. Otherwise, we'll have to divide 3 plots of land and let them rest. And..." Looking at Leaf, who was a little reserved at first but became more and more fluent in her speech, Roland stroked his chin in satisfaction. Golden twos were a new type of wheat with its own jinkala. Its root system could extend 4 to 5 meters underground and its ability to absorb fertilizer was enhanced. Except for the fact that it could not reproduce continuously, it was better than golden ones in all aspects. The only disadvantage was actually an advantage for Neverwinter. The fact that it could not keep seeds meant that once other cities started to plant golden twos, they would have to rely on the supply from the new King's City. At the same time, other low-yield wheat would be squeezed out of the market. This was a great advantage for Roland to monopolize the food market and put this resource under the control of the state. Roland believed that no farmer would go back to planting ordinary wheat after trying to plant golden twos. As long as this improved seed was popularized throughout the country, it would greatly alleviate the food shortage in various places. With food, it would naturally be able to accommodate more people. Chapter 829. After Leaf finished her explanation, Edith was the first to raise a question. Your Majesty, can ordinary people really eat the wheat catalyzed by magic power? This was probably the question that everyone else was most concerned about. After the Pearl of the Northern region spoke, not only Perot, but also Spear looked worried. First of all, there's no essential difference between Golden Twos and Golden Ones. They were both cultivated by Leaf. Golden Twos just further increased the yield of the wheat. Roland answered with a smile. Secondly, although it's modified by magic power, it doesn't contain any magic power. Therefore, we don't have to worry that it will harm ordinary people. In fact, the oatmeal and pancakes I've been eating recently are all from Golden Twos in the experimental field. He couldn't help but think of the debates between natural food, hybrid food, and genetically modified food in the future. Some people always emphasized that natural food was the best, but they didn't know what natural food should look like. It was a very complicated question to explain the origin of Golden Twos in detail. It involved the mutation and inheritance of living things. Even Leaf might not be able to understand it. Although her ability could make plants change dramatically in a short period of time, it basically required a continuous supply of magic power and could not be passed on to the next generation. If the change was too big, the plants might even die without the supply of magic power. Therefore, when Leaf cultivated the golden wheat, her main role was to promote mutation and accelerate its growth. She selected the ones with characteristics that were more suitable for cultivation and eliminated the inferior ones. After generations of breeding, a wheat with outstanding characteristics was finally formed. It was no different from the traditional cultivation method. The only difference was that the process was greatly shortened. In less than 2 years, the wheat had completed the evolution that would have taken hundreds of years. Roland had seen the original watermelon before. It was a fist-sized, hard-shelled fruit sack with a few pieces of yellow pulp in it. At first glance, it looked like an orange. In the 17th century, the flesh of the fruit turned red, and it grew a lot bigger. However, more than half of it was still filled with white meridians. If one used a spoon to dig, it would probably be emptied in 4 or 5 strokes. In addition, the fruits and crops that people were familiar with looked very different from the past. In fact, not only plants, but animals were also different. The most typical example was the dog, a type of pet that did not originally exist, but was transformed from a wolf under the influence of generations of humans. Therefore, the so-called natural food was the result of repeated artificial screening. If it really returned to its original appearance, it would be very difficult to eat. And it wasn't just humans. Any species, from mammals to microbes, were constantly changing their surroundings. From Roland's point of view, there was no difference between humans building a power station and yeast fermenting bread. They were both natural actions because life itself was a part of nature. However, these principles were too profound for the local officials, so he simply simplified his answer into 2 parts. Golden ones are fine after eating it, so Golden Twos are fine too, and, if you don't believe me, I'm eating it too. In this era, the emperor setting an example was the best proof. Seeing that everyone was no longer doubtful, Roland continued, in addition, all food transactions in each city must be controlled by the secondary city hall. Just like in Neverwinter, private sales of food are prohibited. As for the specific implementation methods, Barev, the director, will explain them to you in detail later. Marchioness Spearpassy raised her eyebrows. Your Majesty, if Golden Twos really have such a high output, I'm afraid there will be a lot of surplus after feeding the people. If the city hall wants to buy all of them, it will be very difficult for them to finance. Besides, there are only about 10,000 people in Fallen Dragon Ridge. Do they really need to produce so much food? That's right. The surplus food is not for eating but for storing. Storing? She was a bit surprised. For the upcoming Battle of Divine Will, Roland said word by word. Apart from recruiting more people for the Kingdom of Greycastle, he also wanted to promote Golden Twos because of the war that would decide their fate. As a member of the Kingdom of Greycastle who was born in a peaceful era, he had never experienced a prolonged and cruel war. Therefore, he could only prepare for the war based on his historical experience. The worst situation that Roland could imagine was that the population would be reduced by 30%. All the young men would have to go to the battlefield, and all the women and children would have to work in the factories to provide supplies for the front line. In this situation, the farmlands would probably be left uncultivated. If they had enough food for 2 to 3 years, they might be able to hold on until an opportunity arose. He had asked the Minister of Construction, Car van Bate, about this issue. The latter had told him that a well-designed, well-structured, and well-supervised granary could store shelled grain for up to 5 years. Although the taste would deteriorate after 1 or 2 years, no one would care if the food tasted good or not. Wheat was not the only high-yielding crop in Leaf's experimental field. After 2 years of cultivation, high-yielding crops such as sugarcane, corn, and potatoes had been introduced from other places. The latter two, in particular, had a much higher yield than wheat due to their natural advantages. There were 2 reasons why Roland chose to promote golden tews instead of other crops. First, their offspring could reproduce normally, so they were not suitable for monopolizing the food trade. Second, their storage period was not as long as that of grain. Of course, agriculture was a very complicated industry. It not only included food for humans, but also food for animals. For example, without sufficient soybean fodder, there would be no developed animal husbandry. However, Roland did not have much time to think about it. It was already a big project to ensure that everyone could have staple food during the war. Since most of the participants knew the significance of the Battle of Divine Will, no one questioned this policy that concerned the survival of the human race. At the end of the meeting, Roland looked at Scroll and said, "I hope that agronomy will be added to the secondary education, mainly to train professionals who can master the planting methods of various crops." The education level of other cities was much lower than that of Neverwinter. Roland also felt that it was impossible to promote universal education throughout Grey Castle. Therefore, he thought it would be better for Neverwinter to send professionals to other cities to guide agricultural production. Moreover, specialized agronomy was a start. In the future, subjects such as chemical engineering, architecture, and medicine would also be developed. Roland did not expect his subjects to be able to research and invent new theories on their own. They only needed to apply what they had learned to the operation of the industry. After the meeting, Vendi brought him a piece of news. The witches who were exploring the ruins in the snowy mountains of the western region had safely arrived at the pier of Neverwinter. When Roland arrived at the pier, a figure flew straight into his arms. The light golden curls rubbed against his cheek, making him feel a little itchy. A familiar scent filled his nostrils. Chapter 830. Roland's emotions also surged with these words. He originally wanted to blame her for risking her life, but looking at her relaxed smile, he swallowed the words that were on the tip of his throat. For a moment he didn't know what to say. In the end, he patted her on the back and said, "Don't be so reckless next time." Nightingale nodded and then shook her head. Her voice was so low that only he could hear it. "I'm not like Anna, who can turn those drawings into reality. That's all I can do for you." She paused for a moment and then continued, "But please rest assured, guarding is the most important thing. I won't put myself in danger easily." Her straightforward words made her cheeks turn slightly red. Although she suddenly became unclear halfway through her words, Roland still heard the word "do." After saying that, Nightingale probably exhausted all her courage and scuttled out of his arms and into the mist. It was hard to imagine that this woman, who obviously had the courage to say these words, could single-handedly fight a horrible monster in the ruins with a gun and explosives. He could not help but sigh with emotion. "From now on, please continue to let me be your guard." Nightingale's voice came from behind. When she mentioned this, her tone suddenly became much calmer, and for some reason, Roland felt a long-lost sense of security. Then came the customary hug from the other witches. But what made him a little uncomfortable was the way the tequila survivors looked at him. Different from the members of the Union who were full of laughter, they still maintained basic order after reaching the shore. Under the leadership of several people, they carried black boxes through the dock. But when they passed by Roland, their eyes almost seemed to be nailed to him. There was a burning passion in their eyes. Their desire and eagerness made him shiver a few times. Roland knew the reason. It was because Pasha and the others had told the gods' punishment witches in the front line of the Snow Mountain about the news of the dream world. The purpose of their return was to transport the soul instrument to the Great Snow Mountain and complete the transfer of the devouring worm. The problem was that he would not care so much if they were all women. However, most of these gods' punishment witches had male appearances. After all, the origin of their bodies limited their choices. They had no choice but to possess the male scourge. But for Roland, the feeling was quite different. Even if they knew that their souls were still female, they would still instinctively feel repulsed when being stared at by a group of tall and strong men. If there was an irrepressible desire in their eyes, the feeling would be even worse. When the welcoming ceremony finally ended and Roland returned to the castle, Nightingale once again appeared on his desk, swinging her long legs. Is it true that those empty shells can enter Dreamscape? It seemed that not only the tequila survivors, but also other witches had heard the news. I was also very surprised at first, Roland shrugged. As long as they cut off their consciousness within the range of the beam of light, they will appear in the dream. That beam of light is not so much a connection with the gods, but rather a transmission channel. Nightingale pursed her lips and did not answer. Her eyes became brighter and brighter, and she put her feet on his knees. It was obvious that she was much more daring when there were no outsiders watching. No! Roland immediately vetoed. I know what you are thinking. You want to transform yourself into a god's punishment witch and then enter Dreamscape? I won't allow you to do that. Unlike Anna, Nightingale was obviously impulsive. He had already experienced this before, so when he realized what she was thinking, he immediately shouted at her to stop her from thinking. If he did not do anything, she might really do it. But It's not a problem, Roland said without hesitation. Entering Dreamscape doesn't mean that my consciousness is integrated into them, nor does it mean that they can exist in the world forever. It's just an imitation of a strange world, and it's also being eroded by unknown forces. Maybe one day it won't exist anymore. And even if I enter Dreamscape every day, it will only be for a short night. What about other times? Are you going to live with a shell that will never feel anything? Nightingale lowered her head and was silent for a while. I just heard that they can go to a place that only you have seen, and I think it's too unfair. Roland was amused by her indignant tone. The price they have to pay is unimaginable. Living without feeling anything is more terrible than an invisible cage. Even the Dreamscape is just a little compensation. You don't have to envy them. And what happened to staying by my side is the most important thing? He imitated her tone and said, I don't want a bearded scourge to stay by my side all day. Nightingale immediately turned her head away in embarrassment. I know. I didn't say that I have to possess an empty shell. You said it yourself. Roland smiled. Do you want a chaos drink? She immediately turned her head back. Yes. Well, it's really easy to understand. He took out a bag of fragrant dried fish from the drawer and placed it on the table. He then opened a bottle of a new sky blue flavor drink and filled Nightingale's glass. Thank you this time. I heard from Agatha that if you hadn't severely injured that monster, everyone would have been in danger. Nightingale drank the drink in one gulp and let out a long breath. She then picked up a piece of dried fish and rubbed her nose. There's nothing to thank me for. You're being too polite. I'm not being polite. Roland shook his head. If the exploration team of the Witch Union had been annihilated, it would have been an irreparable loss to Neverwinter. So, your contribution is as important as Anna's. It's just that we each have our own strengths. Do you understand? After hearing these words, Nightingale could not help but raise the corner of her mouth, but as if she did not want him to see through her thoughts, she hurriedly chewed on the dried fish to hide her joyful expression. Right, you said that the dream world is being eroded by an unknown force. What's going on? Will you be in danger? Faced with such a blunt way of changing the topic, Roland laughed inwardly. He did not expose her and continued to say, It's a long story, but there's one thing I'm sure of. No matter what happens to that world in the end, it won't affect me in reality. As long as I don't want to enter the dream world, the beam of light won't appear. As for the unknown force, Roland had said that the Martialist Association would organize new entrants to understand the true nature of the world sooner or later. No matter what she was referring to, he had to see it to know. Chapter 8:31. The Olympiad math itself was not important. What was important was the sign it represented. During his initial exploration in the dream world, he was sure that the books he had not read were all blank. Most of the books in the bookstall and the library only had one cover. He even guessed that these covers came from a corner of his memory. If he had never seen them before, perhaps the books themselves did not even exist. However, the Olympiad math textbook on Zero's desk overturned his conclusion. Why did he not notice anything strange at the beginning? Did he miss something in the first 2 or 3 months of exploration, or did this change happen later? If it was the latter, then it was worth pondering. If Olympiad math could create something out of nothing and gradually recover, then what about other books, or in other words, everything he had never seen before? Obtaining the strange power, eliminating the fallen evils, liberating the force of nature. What was the connection between all these? Could it be the cause of the world's change? These were all questions that Roland desperately wanted to find the answer to. Your Majesty? Nightingale's voice suddenly interrupted his thoughts. Roland lowered his head, only to find that his hands had unknowingly pressed on the instep of her feet and were unconsciously rubbing back and forth. Through the thin socks, he could clearly feel her smooth skin and slender toes. Although I've changed into a new one, I can't wash my body on the ship, Nightingale said a little embarrassedly. I'm afraid it's still a little dirty. How about I go wash first? Roland suddenly felt very embarrassed. He was obviously thinking about something very important. Why did he subconsciously do this? And what did she mean by go wash first? I didn't do it on purpose. Just when he did not know how to explain, there was a sudden knock on the office door, which helped him ease the atmosphere. After Nightingale disappeared into the mist, he cleared his throat and said, "Come in." It was Agatha who walked into the office. She gave a simple salute and said, "All the samples from the Great Snow Mountain have been transferred to the third border city. Would you like to have a look?" Roland pretended to think for a while and nodded after he calmed down. "Of course, go now." "Yes," replied Agatha. When she reached the door, she turned back. "Are you not feeling well?" "Why do you ask?" He was slightly surprised. "Your voice sounds a little strange." "This is a sign of catching a cold," Agatha said seriously. "Although the months of demons have passed, it's coldest when the snow melts. It's very easy for diseases to enter the body. You're not a witch, so you should always remember to protect your body. Even if it's not for yourself, you have to think about the whole human race. Do you understand? Before we depart, I'll ask Lily to examine you first." Fortunately, this inspection didn't take too long. Roland didn't know whether to laugh or cry as he drank a bottle of Lily's special Dispel Disease water. Under the heavy protection of his personal guards and witches, he entered the impassable mountain range. The tequila survivors who came to welcome him made him feel slightly relieved. Except for Pasha and Alethea, the others were all familiar, frequent visitors in the dream world. Number 76, Phyllis, Magic Bug Nest, Faulty, Lightless Curtain, Dawnin, and Shadow Walker, Ling. Except for Phyllis, the others also appeared as male gods' punishment warriors, but they were people who had enjoyed the dream world, so their eyes were much calmer. "I heard that you want to keep those insects of unknown origin in our hull, and you want to see if you can domesticate them?" Alethea was the first to speak. "Mortal King, I have to admit that you're really bold. You're not inferior to those crazy researchers of the Quest Society. But this kind of curiosity can also destroy you. You know, those are the species left by the enemies in the deep sea. That's why I want you to guard them. The captured insects are not aggressive and can't drill holes. You only need a secret chamber to control them." Roland shrugged. And according to Agatha's observation, these insects don't have self-awareness. They only eat and reproduce according to their instincts. We can't rule out the possibility that the escaped multi-eyed monster can control them again. But if even it can get close to Neverwinter, we'll probably be doomed. Isn't Agatha a member of the Quest Society? Alethea shook her mane tentacle disapprovingly. Since she was also a high ascendant before her transformation, her respect for the ice which was not as obvious as Phyllis's. Agatha, who was innocent, just curled her lips and obviously did not want to bicker with Alethea. If that's the case, Celine is also a member of the Quest Society. If she hears this, she'll definitely argue with you again. Pasha dragged Agatha behind her and then apologized to Roland. Alethea is just worried that these strange insects may cause harm to Neverwinter. She doesn't mean anything else. It doesn't matter. Roland waved his hand. Let's go take a look at them first. He knew that Alethea's words were not unreasonable, but what Agatha and Lightning mentioned in the report was really significant. If they destroyed all the insects because of a little risk, it would be like giving up eating for fear of choking. Placing them under the mountains was a form of insurance in itself. Yes, please follow me. Pasha nodded. After passing through the wide hall and narrow passage, they entered another open area, which was about the size of 4 or 5 castles. Several stones of lighting embedded in the wall could roughly outline its outline. The ground under their feet looked like it had been plowed. There was loose soil everywhere, and they could hear the pitter-patter of water coming from the other side. This is a new cultivation room that Fran opened up, Pasha said. There's only one exit. The underground water comes from the rock wall, so it's safe. But, are you really going to cultivate mushrooms and insects in there? Because those huge mushrooms are the insects' food, Agatha explained. If they can grow normally here, we can get a large number of insects with very little effort. If they can't be transplanted, I'll have to let Lily cultivate them artificially. Roland regretfully thought that it was a pity that the mushrooms in the Snow Mountain ruins were poisonous and could not be eaten. Otherwise, with the huge size of the underground mushrooms, they could become a high-protein food that could replace meat. Why do you need so many insects? Phyllis asked curiously. If it's just to study them, wouldn't it be enough to keep a few in captivity? They may be of great use to the development of Neverwinter. Roland motioned to Agatha. If the report is correct. The latter nodded. She found a strange insect lying on a mushroom and dragged it to the ground. She then summoned 2 icicles and nailed it to the joints of the insect's head and waist. Chapter 8:32. As the ice which had described it in her report, it looked like a hairless spider or an ant with a big belly. Its upper body was slender and clearly segmented, and its lower body was swollen and about the size of a grown man's torso. Obviously, this was not the insect's limit. Its abdomen had to expand to at least 2 or 3 times its normal size in order to envelop the entire mad demon. According to the photos sent back from the scene, when the mad demon was contained, its head would be buried in the ground, leaving only its bloated belly exposed. At first glance, it looked like a large, mature insect egg. Did you kill it? Phyllis asked. It's convenient. Although it's not aggressive, it can run away quickly. Agatha condensed the ice into a slender blade and cut into the insect's abdomen. Immediately, a milky white liquid with a slightly fishy smell flowed out. This kind of mucus has a certain antiseptic effect. Under normal circumstances, it can flow freely, but after a long time, it will slowly solidify and turn into a substance like egg white, she explained. And then, eat it? Farty could not help but frown. Although I've never eaten it before, I don't think it tastes too good. Agatha shook her head. The key lies in another kind of body fluid. This time, she busied herself for half an hour before she completely removed the skin on the back of the insect and pulled out a sticky green organ. It looks a little like a gallbladder, Phyllis said excitedly. But it's not bile. Agatha carefully cut a small hole in it and squeezed 2 drops of dark green juice out of the slime that had accumulated on the ground. She then summoned 2 icicles again and quickly stirred the slime. The next step is the key. Roland held his breath and carefully watched the preservative change. Soon, the liquid began to thicken, and the ice witch's stirring became slower and slower. About 2 or 3 minutes later, the icicles that had been inserted into the mucus could not be separated anymore, as if they were tightly bound together by something. He stretched out his finger and pressed the surface of the mucus. It had turned into a soft gelatinous substance, but after a few millimeters, he could not move any further. "This is..." Phyllis exclaimed. "Biorubber," Roland said with a hint of excitement. "This is the thing that immobilized Fran." From the first report sent by Agatha, he had noticed the strange properties of the relic crawlers. At first, he thought it was similar to the ability of spiders to spin silk, but as the follow-up reports arrived, he found that the solidified mucus had excellent elasticity and toughness, comparable to rubber. Not only could it be cemented on the surface of objects, but it could also be shaped into any shape before solidifying. These 2 points alone made it practical. Roland had been sending people to look for gelatinous plants. He believed that as long as he found a sample, Leaf could transform it into a high-yield crop that could be grown on a large scale. However, there was no definite information about rubber trees or rubber grass. Even in the Kingdom of Dawn, which was rich in species, no one had heard of such plants. Therefore, whenever there was a need for elastic materials, they could only ask Soroya to solve it. This undoubtedly limited the production capacity of Neverwinter. With the new batch of machine tools being put into use and the production efficiency and processing level of the factory significantly improved, rubber became the most obvious shortcoming. Although he knew that rubber was just a general name for elastic materials, which could be produced naturally or artificially, he did not know how to operate it. Just when Roland suspected that there were no gelatinous plants in this remote area, the exploration report of the Snow Mountain ruins gave him an unexpected surprise. Because of this, he decided to take the risk and try to breed this alien creature brought by the deep-sea monsters. Now that he had seen the real thing, he was finally sure of his judgment. Regardless of the durability of the solidified mucus, as long as it could act as a seal for moving parts, it could be categorized as a rubber. "According to Summer's scene, we found that it was these reptiles that bound Fran," Agatha said slowly. "They sprayed mucus from their tails and tied her up tightly like a net. However, the mucus in the stomach alone was useless. It had to be mixed with the juice in the organs on the back to achieve the rapid solidification effect. If not for Sylvie's Eye of Magic, we would have to explore for another 10 days to half a month." "I see," Pasha nodded. "This is a good material to make fishing nets and ropes." "The former is okay, but the latter is too soft," Alethea commented bluntly. "No one likes to use a rope that gets longer and longer. Besides, I don't think this knowledgeable mortal king would bring these unknown insects back to Neverwinter just to eat some salted fish." She paused and turned to Roland. "No matter how crazy your experiment is, don't forget that you're not just representing Grey Castle." Her words stunned Roland for a moment. He did not expect that Alethea, who had been brooding over the fact that he was the only leader of the United Front, could understand his intention. He also did not expect that she would say something that, in a sense, acknowledged his leadership nature. Of course. Thinking of this, he could not help but smile. If everything goes well, you'll soon see its wide range of uses. But without the monster that controls them, how can we make the reptiles spew the mucus? Pasha asked. You can't just kill them every time and then take them, right? This is the direction of future research. Agatha put the organs into a leather bag and wiped her hands. If it doesn't work, we can only rely on mass cultivation. In addition to the rubber worms, Roland then looked at other fresh species brought back from the ruins, such as the fruit plants that emitted cold light and the transparent boneless fish that lived in the underground river. However, these new discoveries were overshadowed by the exotic reptiles. The former was just a symbiotic phenomenon. A large group of glowing beetles gathered in the fruit, and after eating the flesh, they would scatter and spread the seeds, so they could not be used as street lamps at all. The latter could hardly see the light and could only live in the underground water vein. Although its meat was delicious, it was destined that it could not be raised on a large scale and could only be served as a rare game on the dining table of a few people. Of course, Roland did not expect every new species to surprise him like the rubber worms. He was already satisfied with the results of the exploration of the Snow Mountain. Before leaving the third border city, Pasha brought 2 gods' punishment witches that he had never seen before to him. Chapter 8:33. 2 days later, a strange-looking concrete ship slowly left the dock of Neverwinter. It rose high from the flat deck, and was at the same time covered with sackcloth, like a moving hill. On both sides of the ship, there were not only armed soldiers, but also more than 10 gods' punishment witches who were responsible for escorting the ship. This ship was the Victory, which was responsible for delivering the soul instrument to the Great Snow Mountain. There, the Tequila Witches would complete the transformation ceremony and possess the worm carrier. Due to the need for secrecy, there was no ceremony or whistle before the ship left. Even the loading work was done secretly at night. Roland stood beside the wet brick dock and watched the ship leave. Once the transformation was completed, Neverwinter would have 3 worm carriers. Whether it was the municipal construction or the impassable defense line project, they would have enough power to carry out the implementation. This was a good thing, but he was not as happy as he had imagined. The 2 witches who volunteered to be transformed were called Jasmine and Lara. After returning to their original forms in the dream world, the 2 were only in their early 20s. They looked about the same age as Tilly, and they were also very active. With the intention of letting them enjoy themselves, Roland took the volunteers to the amusement park in the suburbs with Phyllis and the other witches. They went to the Ferris wheel, the roller coaster, the haunted house. Jasmine even accidentally broke a ghost head falling from the sky, and the pendulum. There was no limit to the food. If he had not robbed several fallen evils a while ago, he would not have been able to afford such expenses. During the 2 days, although Jasmine and Lara were full of surprise and disbelief, they did not ask any questions and went wherever they were told to go. When riding on the roller coaster, they would scream like everyone else, and when eating the strawberry sundae, they would laugh as happily as the girl next door. They looked no different from ordinary people. If he had not known the answer in advance, he would not have believed that the 2 had decided to give up their human bodies and resolutely sacrifice their lives to fight against the demons. It was just like the choice they made when facing the magic core at the bottom of the ruins 400 years ago. When they finally woke up from the dream, they looked calmer than Roland had expected. He wanted to comfort the 2 of them, but it was as if a fishbone was stuck in his throat, and he couldn't say a word. Let them reconsider whether or not they should turn into devouring worms. This was neither in his interest nor in the interest of the United Front. Apart from that, the rest of his words seemed meaningless, more like hypocritical kindness that had nothing to do with him. In the end, he was the one who was comforted. Even now, Roland could still clearly remember the words and the look in their eyes at that time. "Thank you," Jasmine said with a smile, "and we don't regret it," Lara added. At that moment, he felt as if he could hear their heartbeats. It wasn't that they didn't like it, but they did not regret it. "Your Majesty?" Phyllis, who saw him off, looked at him and asked, "Aren't you going back to the castle?" Only then did Roland come back to his senses. The SS Victory had already disappeared from his sight, leaving only some lingering smoke. He suppressed his thoughts and took a deep breath. Is it really impossible to cut off consciousness after possessing the carrier? Phyllis seemed to understand what he wanted to say, so she slightly lowered her voice and said, "A god's punishment which is different from a carrier. God's punishment witches have a certain basic consciousness even if they don't transfer their souls. It's more appropriate to say that witches are manipulators rather than fusion. But a carrier is different. It's a special container, and once it enters the carrier, it's closely connected. Although it can go dormant when it's not used for a long time, no one has ever achieved complete separation, at least not Pasha and the others. But there's also a beam of light above the carrier's head, right?" "That's right." Phyllis nodded. Without the support of magic power, such a huge body can't move at all. So maybe one day, we can also find a way to let their souls return to the dream world, Roland said slowly, looking up at the deep blue sky. After a moment of silence, Phyllis followed his gaze and said, "Well, maybe they'll wait for that day." The snow-covered jungle of the western region was a new visual experience for Lorgar. She had heard more than once about what snow looked like from the traveling merchants, and in her mind, she had equated it with cold white sand. But when she saw it with her own eyes, she realized that snow was far more delicate than gravel and much whiter. Even the purest river sand in the silver stream was not as flawless as the snow that could be seen everywhere. The whole world seemed to have changed color. Although the months of demons had ended, Ashes told her that it would take at least half a month for the snow to melt. That's good, she thought. In this way, I can see a pure white snow city. During the voyage, there was almost nothing they could do. Lorgar explored the inside and outside of the steel ship, but she still could not find the reason why it could move on its own even though there was no wind. Even when she asked Andrea this question, she could not get a definite answer. She only knew that a machine that kept boiling water was pulling the hull. As for how exactly it was pulled, only His Majesty and Miss Anna knew. Not to mention the former, the latter was also a member of the Neverwinter combat power list mentioned by Ashes. Powerful and knowledgeable, Princess Andrea of the Wild Flame clan had a deeper impression of the name Anna. However, when she mentioned this to Andrea, the latter laughed disdainfully. Combat power ranking? She rolled her eyes. Humans and wolves are different. No matter how powerful a person is, he can't beat the power of a group. In terms of individual strength, isn't it the same as arguing with low-level beasts? Wolves also move in groups, Lorgar corrected her. Well, then let's change it to other animals such as tigers, snow leopards. Andrea coughed twice. In short, Anna is the source of all the power in Neverwinter. The First Army could easily defeat the Watchdogs and the Iron Whip clan largely with the help of Anna's ability. I'm guessing she didn't tell you that she almost lost to an ordinary person. Looking at the surprised wolf girl, Andrea showed an, as expected, expression. And that ordinary person was holding a weapon made by Anna. It's meaningless to talk about combat power without these. If you want to become stronger, I suggest you apply for a set of special weapons from His Majesty. At this point, Andrea patted the long spear on her back. If you can install those big pipes on your back after transformation, I'm sure it'll be more effective than any combat skill. Although Lorgar did not agree with this statement, she still silently kept this suggestion in mind. After all, her father often said that listening and observing was the right thing to do, but she should not easily forget her original intention. Because the ship was sailing against the current and the river was rising sharply, the speed of the iron ship was obviously slowed down. On the 5th day after entering the western region, the wolf girl saw a beautiful and strong pigeon. After circling several times in the air, it flew straight to Ashes at the bow of the ship. Just when she thought she could have an extra meal for lunch, she saw Andrea take out a handful of fried dry food with a smile and feed it to the pigeon. The pigeon intimately rubbed against Ashes's cheek as if they were old friends who had not seen each other for a long time. It was not until the pigeon spoke that Lorgar realized it was a witch. Coo coo coo. Got it. Tell Her Highness Tilly that I'll be there soon. Me too. Andrea did not want to be left behind. The pigeon nodded and then spread its wings, quickly disappearing in the northwest direction. She is? Lorgar asked. Maggie, a witch who can transform her whole body like you. Ashes turned around. So that's how it is. But didn't they say that Maggie would transform into a fierce and ugly giant beast with wild strength? Why is it a pigeon? Chapter 8:34. Accompanied by a low whistle, the Roland steadily docked at the pier. Probably because the ship was named after the chief, when Lorgar walked down the pier, she found that all the people on the pier stopped and raised their right hands in the direction of the big ship. And the soldiers of the First Army on the ship responded with the same gesture. It should be a special etiquette. However, it was different from the etiquette she had seen before. It seemed that neither side was in a lower position. Whether it was saluting or receiving, both sides were equal. This was a little difficult for her to understand. If both sides were of the same status, why did they have to salute? In her opinion, whether it was a kneeling salute or a fist-clenching salute, there had to be one side receiving the salute so that it could express respect and obedience. She also noticed that even the children playing by the pier made the same gesture and stuck out their chests. During this process, not a single person's expression was one of humility or unwillingness. Everyone's eyes were filled with joy and vitality. Through this etiquette, they seemed to have completed an indescribable communication. This is a military salute. Ashes took the initiative to speak. At first, I didn't understand why they did this. I thought Roland Wimbledon forced its subjects to do this, but later I found it was not what I thought. Lorgar raised her eyebrows in surprise. It has nothing to do with the ship called Roland ? Yes, as long as a ship carrying the First Army docks, they will raise their hands spontaneously to salute, because it means that another group of family members has returned safely. But they don't look like a family, Princess Andrea said hesitantly. If it was a family member, shouldn't they be more excited? Moreover, the soldiers were mostly men, and there were only a few women on the pier. Did each of them happen to have a brother? All the members of the First Army are from Neverwinter, which means that not only most of the residents' families have joined the army, but also many of the neighbors have joined the army. This is completely different from mercenaries and militias, which are forced to work. It's more like a job full of honor. They celebrate the return of other people's children, and others will celebrate the safe arrival of their relatives. This is probably what His Majesty meant by the People's Army. An army made up entirely of citizens? The wolf girl wore a thoughtful expression and followed the witches into Neverwinter. The first impression she had of the city, which was known as the new capital of Grey Castle, was its tidiness. Other than the endless stream of pedestrians, both the houses and the streets were arranged in a straight line. Even the trees on both sides of the road were the same. This kind of compact arrangement made her feel a little depressed. Although it looked magnificent, it was not as comfortable as in the Iron Sand City. To her disappointment, there was not much snow in Neverwinter. Even the hard road under her feet was dry. She could only see some residual snow on the branches and roofs. The hope of traveling to a pure white snow city was dashed. Of course, this place wasn't without its merits. Lorgar found that some of the houses along the street had huge plaques with various signs written on them, such as Old Hunter's Leather, Straw House, North Slope Gem Shop, and so on. Although many of the horizontal signs were still blank, it was enough to dazzle her eyes. Moreover, there was a sign at each intersection, which not only marked where each fork led to, but also marked the corresponding street with the name. For example, the road she was walking on now was Glory Avenue. The wolf girl soon realized that this would be very helpful for strangers who set foot in Neverwinter for the first time. Through these signs, she could quickly remember the general appearance of the city, know where to buy and sell goods, and where to spend the night, so that she could avoid the trouble of asking for help from local snakes or rats. When she talked with the traveling merchants who traveled back and forth in the southernmost region, what she heard the most were the stories of the pioneers when they first arrived in a new place. The unfamiliar city was always full of hardships and frustrations. When they exposed their identity as outsiders, in a sense, it was equal to putting themselves in a vulnerable position. Such a small gesture greatly facilitated newcomers. Even she felt an inexplicable sense of familiarity when she saw the road signs, as if the city was welcoming her. Perhaps because of this, the bustling and busy streets in front of her also seemed natural. Unfortunately, Lorgar didn't have much time to appreciate this strange city. Ashes quickly took her into the Lord's castle. After waiting in the hall for a while, a guard brought a reply from the King of Grey Castle. "Come with me. His Majesty has agreed to see you." Somehow, Lorgar suddenly felt a little nervous. She secretly took a deep breath and followed the guard to the third floor. Then she walked alone into a bright study room. Behind a mahogany table placed by the French window sat a surprisingly young man. He wore a plain robe with gray hair trailing over his shoulders. He didn't wear a crown, nor did he wear a ring on his fingers. As he toyed with a quill, he looked at her with interest. Is this the great chief who turned the southernmost region upside down? For a moment, Lorgar couldn't associate the man with the image she had envisioned. In her mind, a knowledgeable person with extraordinary martial arts concepts should be an elder in his 40s, with wrinkles appearing on his forehead and a beard braid that reached his chest. He should also be an elder with a deep gaze. Even if the northerners don't like to tie their beards into long braids, he shouldn't be so young. Only then did she realize that she had forgotten to ask about the great chief while she was inquiring about the powerful warriors in Neverwinter. After hesitating for a moment, Lorgar decided to salute according to the Majin's custom. She flicked her ears, touched her knees, and slowly crouched down. After all, Lorgar had heard that gray hair was a symbol of the royal bloodline of Grey Castle. "You're the divine lady of the Wild Flame clan, right?" The man didn't deliberately let her salute for too long. As soon as her forehead touched the ground, he said, "Get up, virtuous wolf. Welcome to Neverwinter. I'm Roland Wimbledon, the king of Grey Castle, and of course, your great chief." Virtuous wolf? Lorgar frowned secretly. What kind of name is this? Is there a difference between a wolf and a virtuous wolf? But she quickly stood up as if she hadn't heard the words. "My name is Lorgar Burnflame, your majesty. As for the title of divine lady, since we're here, it's more appropriate to call her a witch. In addition, my father Gwel's Burnflame asked me to pay tribute to you on behalf of the Wild Flame clan. May your rule last as long as the oasis." But this time she didn't get an immediate response. Chapter 8:35. This made Lorgar's heart sink. She also knew what her body looked like. When she was in Ironsand City, she had heard a lot about wolf-shaped monsters, half-orcs, forsaken people, and so on. At that time, she was the head of the clans, the third princess. These words were usually spread behind her back, and no one dared to mention them in front of her. But this was not Ironsand City, and she was no longer the princess of Wild Flame. Without the protection of the clans, she would soon have to face these harsh words alone. "Your ears? And your tail, are they real?" The great chief looked like he wanted to say something, but in the end, he could not help asking. "Do they need magic power to maintain them, or have they become a part of your body?" Lorgar bit her lip, lifted her hair, and showed one side of her empty cheek. The place where her ear should have been was now flat and smooth. The answer was self-evident. "I can't take them back, your majesty. Although they look weird, they are my real appearance. I don't want to cover up these defects. If you ask me, I'll try to reduce the time I'm exposed to the public so as not to scare them." Although she had made the decision to face herself, she still felt a sense of inferiority at this time. The Divine Lady was originally regarded by the Majins as the combination of strength and beauty. She was the pride of each clan and was almost unanimously sought after by the young warriors. However, she was an exception. Not only was she ignored after her awakening, but there were also rumors in the clan that questioned her. This was why her father was determined to let her take over the position of chief. Lorgar put all her energy into combat training. She usually pretended to be indifferent, but after hearing too much about it, she would be affected. Of course, these were all within her expectations. Since she had chosen the path she wanted to take, she would not give up easily no matter what obstacles she encountered. The unstoppable sand path in the dream had already pointed her in the right direction. Thinking of this, the wolf girl could not help but straighten her chest. "Weird." The great chief smacked his lips. "Why do you say so?" Lorgar, who had secretly prepared herself, was stunned. "Not because. It's not like the ears of ordinary people." Roland shrugged. "Ordinary people don't have magic power. Besides, they don't affect your movement and hearing at all, so how can they be considered as defects? At most, they can be considered as a physical characteristic, and a very interesting one at that. Don't you think that these ears look very beautiful?" "Ahem, your majesty, please watch your words." At the same time, a woman's voice came from behind her. Even though it was very soft, she still heard it. However, Lorgar's attention was completely focused on the great chieftain's words, and she had no time to care about anything else. "Beautiful." She felt that it was impossible to use this word on herself. For a moment, she didn't know what to say. Most of the emotions that she had been brewing unknowingly dissipated, and she felt a warm current rushing to her cheeks. How could a half-human, half-beast be beautiful? In short, I won't ask you to cover it up or wear a hood when you go out. You can do whatever you want. Roland continued, maybe some people will criticize you, but as time goes by, they'll gradually accept it. At worst, you can ask Soroya to draw a series of comic books about you, or join the Starflower troupe to perform a play. After all, becoming an idol is the best way for people to quickly become familiar with you. Comic books? Starflower troupe? Idol? Lorger felt that her brain could not work. She could only stand there in a daze, unable to say a word. Fortunately, at this time, the great chieftain finally returned to the original topic. By the way, I heard from Ashes that you're here to fight against the demons? The wolf girl breathed a sigh of relief. At the same time, I'm here to hone my skills, Your Majesty. I heard that there's a witch in Neverwinter named Miss Nana who can heal wounds left in battles, which is very important for a warrior. You should know that it's every warrior's dream to accumulate combat experience without any worries. Of course, in addition to fighting against those powerful enemies for you, I'll also pay for your treatment in full. I see. Roland nodded. If you're willing to join the Witch Union, you'll have a great chance to fight against them in the future, but I prefer to fight alone, Your Majesty, Lorger interrupted softly. Like a mercenary, I don't want to be distracted by anything other than fighting. She knew that these were just excuses. The real reason was that she did not want to pledge allegiance to the Great Chief before she fully understood the Northern Kingdom. She did not forget that she was a Sand Nation. If the Great Chief could not keep his promise in the Land of Fire, the Sand Nation moving south would sooner or later be separated from Grey Castle. If that happened, the King of Grey Castle would become her enemy, so she could not make a rash decision. Really? Roland thought for a moment and then spread out his hands with a slight regret. Then I can't agree to your request. Why? Lorger asked in surprise. In her opinion, a skilled mercenary should be in high demand anywhere, not to mention that she did not even talk about the cost. Not only would he fight for free, but he would also pay for treatment at his own expense. This was a free gift, but he refused it. How could it be possible? Because what we're facing is a full-scale war, not a small skirmish between a few tribes. Was he saying that the battles of the Sand Nation were all child's play? Lorger suddenly felt a rush of blood to her head. She raised her tail and was about to refute, but the Great Chief suddenly changed the topic. You should have fought with Ashes, right? How's her strength? The wolf girl suppressed her dissatisfaction and replied angrily, very powerful. Even in the southernmost region, she's a first-class warrior. This is the power of an extraordinary, Roland said slowly. And there's an even more incredible transcendent. The latter completely breaks through the limits of the human body, and there's no longer any hindrance in their growth. They're worlds apart from the extraordinary. Transcendent? Lorger could not help but be attracted by what he said. What kind of realm is that? Even Ashes can only look up to it? Chapter 8:36. Lorger could not remember how she got out of the castle. She stood on the street in a daze, watching the people passing by hurriedly. This meeting was completely out of her expectations, in every aspect. According to her expectations, the Great Chief would first reject her because of her weird half-human, half-beast appearance, the mean king would directly show his disgust, and the shrewd one would remain expressionless. However, when she stated her intention, the Great Chief's attitude would change. After all, a free warrior could never be too much, not to mention that she had promised to help Neverwinter fight against the demons. Who would refuse such a good deal with no harm? Then she would live in the castle district, or be treated as a clan guest in a hotel in the inner city. Later, through Ashes, she would gradually get to know more witches, especially those who were good at fighting, including Miss Nana. Although not everyone would pay attention to her, there would always be people like her who hoped to improve their skills by sparring with different opponents. This kind of sparring was beneficial to both sides, at least it was much more effective than beating sandbags. When everything was ready, she would go to the place where the demons haunted and begin to challenge herself. According to Ashes, these enemies were hiding in the uninhabited northwest wilderness. However, she was not afraid of surviving in the wild, nor did she care how well they hid. Wolves were the masters of the wilderness, and their extremely sensitive hearing and smell could help her find the enemy's lair. However, the result was completely reversed. Since her awakening, it was the first time that Lorgar had heard someone praise her beautiful ears. Even her father, who had never disliked her, often said, "If you didn't have these abnormal parts, you would definitely be one of the most beautiful girls in Iron Sand City." Wolf ears? Are they really beautiful? His words had caught her unprepared at that time, so much so that she was a little slow in following up the conversation. The great chief did not seem to dislike her, but he refused her request to participate in the demon's battle without asking for anything in return. She was still in a daze until she left the castle. No, this is just a small setback. Lorgar patted her cheeks and took a deep breath. As long as she persevered on her own path, there was no obstacle that she could not overcome. She comforted herself in her heart. Thinking about it carefully, it didn't matter if the great chieftain didn't agree. It wouldn't affect her initial plan much. She could still understand the city by herself, understand the details of the devils, and get to know other witches. At worst, it would just be a little slower. Although the other party refused her request, they did not impose any restrictions on her. They also said that if she changed her mind, she could apply to join the Witch Union at any time. She had originally planned to work alone, so it might be better this way. Thinking of this, Lorgar's drooping ears perked up again. She wagged her tail and clenched her fists. That's right. If the demons were really so powerful, why would the great chief set up the king's city here? If they came from the northwest, the first human city they would encounter would be Neverwinter. If he wasn't certain that he could defeat the demons, shouldn't he stay as far away from danger as possible? He even said, "I don't want you to die." It seemed to be out of concern, but in reality, it might just be a bluff. Before the battle, it was still uncertain who would be the winner. If she was really injured, could the great chief order Miss Nana to refuse to treat her? In this way, this sentence was tantamount to making him lose face. Princess Lorgar of the Wild Flame clan felt cheered up again. She still had more than 100 golden dragon pieces with her, which could not be spent if she stayed in a hotel. Even if the treatment cost was astonishing, it was impossible to charge dozens of golden dragon pieces at a time. Including food, drinks, clothes, herbs, desert guides, and other expenses, it would not be a problem to live alone for several years. She did not believe that without the support of the King of Grey Castle, she would not be able to find trouble with the demons. With a plan in mind, Lorgar suddenly felt a lot more at ease. She looked around and began to look at the horizontal signs on the surrounding houses. Since she had decided to take things slowly, the first thing she needed to do was to find a place to settle down. However, it was still early, so she was not in a hurry. After all, she had successfully arrived at the western region of Grey Castle. According to the customs of the Sand Nation of the Majin clan, she should have a good celebration. Therefore, the tavern became her first target. Before Lorgar took 2 steps, she was attracted by a delicate plaque. There were several vivid glass cups on the wooden board, which were filled with colorful drinks. There were also some unknown fruits as decorations, which made people want to drink to their heart's content. Below the cups was the name of the tavern, Evelyn's 100 Flavors Wine House. On the other side of the plaque, there was a line of small words, "New Chaos Drinks on Sale. The first cup is 50% off. Welcome to taste." Chaos drinks? Lorgar raised her eyebrows. These 2 words were obviously not related, but they were forcibly put together. The designer must not be good at naming people. If she had not drunk it, she would not know what kind of drink it was. No wonder it was on sale at the beginning. Otherwise, it would not be sold at all. However, the name of the tavern clearly told her that it was indeed a tavern. Forget it. Since it is called 100 Flavors, there must be other drinks to drink. She thought to herself. Besides, the tavern looked spacious and bright, and there were many people going in and out, so the taste should not be bad. Lorgar touched the purse in her arms, turned around and walked towards the tavern. Not all of what she said was true. Nightingale said while chewing the dried fish. Especially the reason why she doesn't want to join the witch union. I can feel her emotional fluctuations. To be on the safe side, you'd better ask Vendi to ask her for a 10-question test. That's the examination procedure when applying to join. Roland shook his head with a smile. She didn't even submit an application, so there's no need to be so strict. And Lorger's purpose in coming to Neverwinter is to fight against demons and train herself. Are you sure about this? This part doesn't sound like a lie. Nightingale curled her lips. That's all right. The original intention of the Witch Union is to give you a place to belong. It's meaningless to force others to join. Besides, it's normal to be wary when you just came to a new city. Just let her be. Roland pretended to be generous and waved his hand to end the topic, but he still felt a little regret in his heart. Especially when he was admiring the long furry ears that moved left and right, he really wanted to call the wolf girl over and touch them. And the tail that she always swayed unconsciously. He always wanted to know whether he could make her weak and limp like what he had experienced in his previous life when he grabbed the root of the tail. But in the end, he still managed to control his endless thoughts. After all, he represented the king of a country, and he had to maintain basic dignity and manners. It was definitely not because of Nightingale's presence. Just as Roland was about to go to the Miracle Building Project site to check on the construction progress, City Hall Director Barov suddenly knocked on the door and came in. Chapter 837. Roland pondered for a while before he remembered that the Joint Chamber of Commerce was a cooperative supply and marketing organization under his leadership. Its main members were businessmen from several large islands in the fjords. Although they had reached a basic consensus during the negotiations last autumn, the chaos drinks produced by Evelyn were still far from being able to be sold in bulk at that time. Therefore, the Chambers of Commerce only brought back a few bottles of samples and had not officially started selling them. This time, they should be here for this matter. Because of the winter offensive and the desert action plan, and the entire western region was preparing for the unification of the kingdom, he had temporarily forgotten about the Joint Chamber of Commerce. Now that they had taken the initiative to come to him, it saved him a lot of effort. Show them to the reception hall. I'll be there soon, Roland ordered. After Barov left, he turned to Nightingale and said, Go and inform Tilly and Vendi to come to the castle. After all, this is the first business cooperation between the Witch Union and Sleeping Island. As soon as he walked into the reception hall, several businessmen immediately stood up and bowed to him. In addition to his old acquaintances Marjorie, Gammon and Marlin from the Crescent Moon Bay Chamber of Commerce, Roland recalled the names of the others. They were Nibelung from the Shallow Water City Chamber of Commerce and Atir from the Sunset Island Chamber of Commerce. As soon as they sat down, Nibelung said eagerly, Your Majesty, the samples we brought back last time caused a great sensation among the merchants on the island. Everyone who tasted it praised its novel taste. I bet that as soon as it starts selling, Chaos Drinks will become the most successful product in the history of the fjords. And it's not just a drink, Atir echoed. For example, that bottle of fiery red spicy juice. Although it doesn't quench your thirst, it's particularly delicious when poured on steamed fish or barbecued meat. At the same time, it can also be used to drive away the cold and refresh the mind. The effect is even more effective than your white wine. At least the latter makes you dizzy and can't be enjoyed while sailing, but the former doesn't have this problem at all. Indeed, Marjorie nodded with a smile. Not only those merchants, but also many explorers have noticed Chaos Drinks. After all, a drink that can drive away the cold and keep warm without any side effects might be able to save their lives during a shipwreck. Therefore, I suggest that different Chaos Drinks be priced differently, Atia continued. Products with special effects like this can be sold at a higher price with a little promotion. Moreover, they are less than one bottle after another. He was obviously using it as an energy drink. Roland glanced at him approvingly. Sure enough, businessmen who were successful in the fjords all had good marketing foresight. Through a small number of samples, they realized that this was actually a general category of various products with obvious differences. For such goods, Pricing them according to their characteristics was the best way to squeeze out their value. Since the response is so good, we can proceed with the next step of the sales according to the contract we signed earlier. Roland clapped his hands and said, "Whether it's the order amount or the distribution ratio, you should have no objections. However, you need to pay 30% of the payment in advance. You should have brought enough Golden Dragon, right?" Since the main terms of the Joint Chamber of Commerce had been negotiated before the new year, there were not too many details that needed to be discussed in detail. The main purpose of inviting Tilly here was to witness the result and show that he did not tamper with the distribution amount. After all, she not only promised to stay in Neverwinter in the future, but also promised to move the witches of Sleeping Island to the western region in batches. He had to show his sincerity. According to the win-win bet, during the months of demons, 30% of the advance payment and the final sales amount would belong to the reward fund, which would be shared by City Hall, the Witch Union, and Sleeping Spell. "Of course, Your Majesty." Nibelung grinned. "This time, my ship didn't even have a box of goods. Apart from the craftsmen and sailors, the rest are all shiny yellow coins." "Then let's go and check the goods now," Roland said with a smile. The beverage factory specially built for Evelyn was located opposite the alcohol factory. However, it was more like a well-guarded warehouse than a factory. It did not cover a large area. The first floor was only about 100 square meters. It was made of brick and concrete and had no windows on all sides. The only entrance and exit was a thick iron gate, which was guarded by the recruits of the First Army. It looked like a military important place. Roland led the merchants through the courtyard gate and into the bungalow. They went down the stairs into the basement, where their field of vision suddenly widened. The area underground was about 3 or 4 times larger than that above ground. Rows of neatly arranged wooden shelves made it look like a manor wine cellar. In order to avoid irreparable damage caused by fire, neither open flames nor electric wires were allowed here. Instead, they used a patio to provide illumination, so it was still a little dim. 2 layers of round wooden barrels were placed horizontally on each row of wooden shelves. Of course, not every barrel contained chaos drinks. Evelyn could only produce 1 barrel of chaos drinks a day. So far, she had only produced a little more than 100 barrels, in addition to those that Roland had monopolized and those that were distributed to the members of the Witch Union every month. Roland knocked on the barrel, and a dull sound came from inside. This place can provide 20 barrels of chaos drinks a month. On average, each Chamber of Commerce can produce 5 barrels. No matter how long you sell them out, as long as the output doesn't change, the number will be the same. So it doesn't matter whether you come once every 3 months or once every 6 months. This time, you can take away a total of 100 barrels of chaos drinks. They're all on the first row of wooden shelves. If there's no problem with the inspection, I'll send someone to transport them to the dock area. "Don't you want us to taste it?" Gammon asked in surprise. "It's not wine. The longer it is kept, the more mellow it tastes." Roland shrugged. Some chaos drinks can be stored for a long time, but it doesn't mean that all of them are like this. So after brewing, the first thing to do is to sterilize and seal it. Kill, sterilize. They spoil like food. The hotter the weather, the faster they spoil. Sterilization can prevent this process. As for how it's done, you don't need to know. You just need to know that once the barrel is opened, the drinks inside won't be able to maintain their best taste. He spread out his hands. You can choose to sell them as soon as possible or store them again. As long as you put them in a cool place, they'll be fine for a month or 2. But, as Atir said, every batch of chaos drinks is different. There will always be some that are better than others. How are we going to choose? Gammon asked hesitantly. Can you order someone to divide each barrel into 4 equal parts and seal it? Then we won't have to worry about which barrel to choose. That way, Soroya and Lily's task will be several times more. Roland thought to himself, for this kind of thing that takes up industrial production resources and brings no obvious benefits to myself, it's naturally better to make it as simple as possible. Sterile sealing is not an easy thing to do. And after dividing them into 4 equal parts, each Chamber of Commerce will have a small and complicated stock, which is not good for the sales. As for the taste. He paused. Just in Grey Castle, the demand for drinks in the northern region and the western region is completely different. The taste that is not popular here may be very popular in another city. As you often transport goods, you should be very clear about this. Gammon was speechless. It's impossible to let you taste the taste first. Otherwise, it would be troublesome enough to distribute and coordinate the supply. Moreover, the contract is based on barrels, and there is no mandatory purchase quantity. If there is a temporary lack of taste and no one asks for it, Neverwinter will suffer a loss. Roland secretly curled his lips. After all, for Evelyn, the magic power paid for each barrel was the same. Chapter 8:38. Although it was a bit like coercion, the Fjord's merchants finally accepted this choice. They all knew that if they quit now, others would only swallow their share together with them. In the face of a commodity with no substitute, this little concession was nothing. Moreover, they had to admit that Roland's words made some sense. Although the samples brought back before had obvious differences in taste, they were not comparable to the fruit wine or other drinks on the market. The only difference was how much they earned. Moreover, everyone was responsible for sales in different regions, so the possibility of competition was not high, which further reduced the risk of choosing inferior products. Seeing Gammon and others looking back and forth around the barrels, and even putting their noses on them to sniff, trying to find any residue of the drinks, Roland laughed in his heart. Although these barrels looked ordinary, there was a thin film drawn by Soroya inside, which completely isolated the air from the inside and outside. It was impossible to smell any difference with just the nose. While everyone was choosing the chaos drinks, he quietly called Marjorie aside and whispered, "The drinks in the barrels on both sides of number 10 and number 24 taste pretty good. At least I like them personally." The latter showed a surprised look. "Your Majesty. Take it as a thank you gift." Roland chuckled. "If it weren't for the first group of merchants you brought, it might have taken 2 or 3 more years for the Western region to become what it is today. Although your original purpose wasn't to do business with Border Town, but the town still benefited a lot from it, so this compensation is nothing." He paused. "Of course, only this time. After all, if you draw good cards every time, others will be suspicious." What he said was basically the truth. At that time, the steam prototype was cumbersome and difficult to operate. It could only be used for the simplest drainage and hauling work, so it did not have much of a market in the Western region. If she had not introduced it to the mineral merchants of Silver City, thus opening up a profitable business route, the primitive accumulation in the early stage would have been much more difficult. Moreover, the Marjorie Chamber of Commerce was in charge of sales in the Grey Castle continent. It was a good choice to first use the best varieties to occupy the local market. "Then I'll accept your gift." The female merchant did not decline too much. When it came to dealing with people, she did have the shadow of thunder. She was candid and generous, and at the same time, not bothering about trifles. After bowing to Roland with her hand on her chest, Marjorie covered her mouth and smiled. "Since I've accepted your gift, I can't do nothing in return. Let me tell you a piece of good news." "Oh." Roland raised his eyebrows. "The first group of merchants you mentioned, which is my old friend Hogg, also plans to visit the Western region in the near future." She lowered her voice. "But judging from his letter, he's not the only one who came. The machines you sold have spread throughout the central region of the kingdom. Now almost all the mining merchants are asking him about the rail transportation system. Maybe in half a year, your factory will be busy all day." "Is that so?" Roland was a little startled, then he smiled and nodded. It seems that it is indeed good news worth celebrating. However, only he knew that when he heard this news, a heartfelt sense of accomplishment suddenly surged from the bottom of his heart. The day had finally come. In the past 2 years, he had sold nearly 100 steam engines, of which only 30% were sold in the kingdom. When Grey Castle Industries was first established, the monthly output was only a miserable 2 to 3 units. Even when the demand of the territory was not met, he still sold a part of them to Silver City. He had been looking forward to this day. Such a small amount of source power was almost negligible for the Industrial Revolution, but it was a signal of the transformation from manpower to machinery, a signal that the production method was about to be reborn. When everyone noticed this new force and wanted to follow suit, the revolution began. This kind of profit-oriented revolution was almost impossible to stop. Its effect was thousands of times better than shouting and promoting products everywhere, and the energy contained in it was enough to change the whole era. Today's Neverwinter was also different from before. The output of the industrial park in a day was equivalent to that of a month in the past, and after 3 shifts, it could increase even more. Most importantly, a large number of apprentices who had received primary education were continuously being transformed into workers. They had never touched a hammer or forged a sword, but they had learned how to use machines to produce machines. As long as the time was right, Neverwinter would be able to break out the jaw-dropping productivity of this era. From Marjorie's news, Roland seemed to see that the time was not far from him. 2 days later, the merchant from the fjords left Neverwinter with the chaos drinks he had selected. Barov could not wait to enter his office with a thick stack of books. From the smile on the old director's face, which was so wide that his eyes could not be seen, Roland knew that he must have gained a lot this time. However, after opening the statistics book, he did not stay too long on the entry amount, but focused on the new arrivals. According to the agreement of the last meeting, Sunset Island and Shallow Water City would each provide 300 craftsmen in exchange for completing the transformation of the paddle steamer within 5 years, while the rich Crescent Moon Bay directly used 2,000 people and 50,000 Golden Dragon coins to buy a large steel ship without sails. Although the purpose of both parties was to obtain the shipbuilding technology, Roland did not care about it. Instead, he regarded it as a bargaining chip. As long as they were willing to keep the craftsmen, he could give them not only the manufacturing methods and craftsmanship, but also the design drawings. Therefore, they also put in a lot of effort this time. According to Barov's statistics, the number of craftsmen brought by the fjords this time was 10 to 20% more than the agreement, and most of them were old carpenters with many years of shipbuilding experience. Their intention was self-evident. Since Neverwinter did not prohibit the transfer of technology after the contract was completed, except for those who were regarded as part of the transaction, the rest of the people would bring all the knowledge back to the fjords. Unfortunately, they did not understand the term technology of the new era. Roland could not help but smile. Soon, the people of the fjords would find that if they wanted to produce their own steamships, they had to buy raw materials, processing equipment, and key parts from Neverwinter. In the end, they would only become more dependent on Grey Castle, just like those small countries without complete industrial capacity in the future. He picked up the quill, drew a circle under the total number of craftsmen, and then handed the statistics book back to Barov. Chapter 839. Tilly was sitting at her desk, writing a secret letter to be sent to Sleeping Island on a small piece of paper. Since she needed to send the letter by courier, she had to reduce the size of the words as much as possible and express her meaning in the most concise language. The content was actually not complicated and could be summarized in 2 or 3 sentences, but somehow she could not stop writing. It was as if some kind of emotion was pulling her, making her unconsciously nag as if she was writing a letter to her family. It was really rare for her to let her emotions get out of control. However, Tilly unexpectedly found that this feeling was not bad. Since it was not a matter of life and death, she let it be. The thin ink marks slowly spread out on the letter paper, giving people a warm and comfortable feeling. Dear Camilla, the months of the demons have ended and the Western region has returned to peace. The Victory Day celebration was particularly interesting. Do you still remember the hot pot I told you about? Roland directly moved this method to the town square. He used 4 huge iron pots to make a thick soup and then threw pieces of meat, vegetable leaves, whole chicken and bird beak mushrooms into the soup. The fragrance of the soup could even be smelled on the other side of the Redwater River. He also said that the hot pot was a specialty of Neverwinter and must be tasted. Under Roland's instigation, Everyone followed his example and threw all kinds of food into the pot. I have to say, with the fresh and thick soup base, no matter what was eaten, it was quite delicious. Whether it was the city hall officials, the witch union, or the ordinary people, there was no difference between them, which was probably impossible to see in the past. Just by witnessing such an enthusiastic scene, it was hard to imagine that a cruel war that would decide everyone's fate would soon descend upon the world. Because of this kind of joy was particularly precious. I wrote this to tell you that Neverwinter is really an incredible place. I don't intend to let you drop your prejudice against the nobles, but Roland Wimbledon is not a noble at all. Don't be surprised, I just confirmed my previous speculation. He is just like us. The so-called noble identity is just a past or a cover-up. So you should also come to see this new city. Although Sleeping Island needs to be guarded, I don't want you to use this responsibility as a cage to bind yourself. By the way, this time during the months of demons, our witches finally didn't just stand by and watch. Roland's main plan to conquer the southernmost region revolved around Ashes, Andrea, and Echo. As for the interesting things that happened in the desert, I won't go into them here. I can talk about them in detail later. I believe that when the other sisters come, the power of Sleeping Island will definitely become more important. To the chief butler of Sleeping Island. At this moment, a hand suddenly stretched out from behind Tilly and placed a sky-blue drink in front of her. Well, Lin Sanjiu smiled. She didn't need to turn her head to know that the other party was Ashes. It just so happens that I've written about you. Do you want to take a look? No, Ashes rubbed her shoulder and said, I have to prepare dinner today. Then go ahead. I'm looking forward to your delicious cooking, Tilly said with a smile. The witches usually dined with Roland in the castle's living room, so there was rarely a fire in the small kitchen. However, they had been separated for several months, and Ashes wanted to share a dinner with her alone. Of course, she would not refuse, not to mention that Ashes had mysteriously claimed that she had obtained a magical seasoning from the southernmost region. She took a sip of the chaos drink, which was as refreshing as an ice spring, and continued to write. We've chatted for so long. Let's get down to business. According to the agreement between him and I, we will move at the beginning of spring. Now it's time to take action, and I haven't changed my mind. Everything is as expected, even more perfect. So just follow the plan. I believe you are well prepared. After the months of demons, the trade routes in the fjords will soon be busy. I'm afraid it will be difficult to hire enough ships and sailors in a short time. If you encounter such trouble, you can ask Thunder for help. He is looking for adventurers to explore the ceiling. Ships and people won't be a problem. Before the steel ship Roland built for him is launched, Thunder will stay in the fjords. As long as you can contact him, he will definitely help us. In addition, don't forget to tell the lords and merchants of the fjords where we are going. Tell them that sleeping spell will continue to be open to everyone. Don't worry that some witches will be too far away from the fjords after the migration. Now that the port at the shoal of the western region has been put into use, and Roland also plans to build a new port at Endless Cape for supplies, it will be easy for Neverwinter's ships to reach the fjords. And I have a hunch that it won't be long before this route will become the busiest trade route between the mainland and the islands. Crossing the channel will become normal, especially when the modified paddle steamers in the port are completed. Please remember, Camilla, moving the western region does not mean giving up on Sleeping Island. Neverwinter is the front line against the demons and the most dangerous stronghold after the start of the Battle of Divine Will. As a member of the human race, we should do our duty and make a contribution to the fight against the enemy. But even Roland is not sure that we can win. When the western region is conquered by the enemy, the only place we can go is the fjords. Although it's better not to happen, as long as Sleeping Island is still there, we still have hope. Take care of yourself. Tilly Wimbledon. Princess Tilly heaved a sigh of relief after she finished writing. Camilla Derry was originally a member of the nobility in the Old King's City, so she was very clear about the dirty deeds among the nobles, which made her completely lose confidence in her social class. Although she still supported all the decisions she made, The chief butler had a vague feeling that she would stay on Sleeping Island forever. However, in Tilly's mind, although Sleeping Island was important, it should not be a lonely place. The guards should take turns, and everyone should have the opportunity to come to Grey Castle and experience the life of a normal person again, which was what she wanted to see. Of course, this letter might not be able to completely dispel Camilla, but as more and more witches learned about the Western region, she believed that Camilla would change her original opinion. Tilly put down the quill, rolled the letter into circles, and tied them with a string. When Honey was called over, she was shocked to see 5 or 6 paper circles on the table. "Are they all sent to Sleeping Island?" she asked. "Yes, and they all have to be sent to Camilla." Tilly nodded. "Isn't it too much?" "It doesn't matter. Since it's a letter from Her Highness Tilly, we have to send it to her no matter what." Honey patted her chest. "I'll go and catch 2 big seabirds for you now. Not to mention a secret letter, even a honey-grilled fish can be sent to her." Watching the little girl skipping out of the room, Princess Tilly could not help but walk to the window and look in the direction of the fjords. It would not be long before the witches who were forced to leave their homeland would set foot on this land again. Starting from Neverwinter, everything about them would be rewritten. At that time, the Western region would be many times more lively than it was now. Chapter 840. When the sky had just turned white, Broken Sword had already fully woken up. She got out of bed, walked to the window, and pushed it open. The slightly chilly morning wind suddenly poured into the room, bringing with it both the coolness of melting snow and the fragrance of spring. The blue sky was not fully illuminated, but judging from the sparse clouds, it would be a good day today. She put on her clothes and went to the living room. There was a plate of roasted nuts on the table and a can of vegetable soup, just enough for 4 people. Among them, Annie always got up the earliest. Not only was she the first to finish washing, but she also occasionally made breakfast. Although they moved from the Foreign Affairs building to the Witch building after officially joining the Witch Union and could enjoy 3 meals at any time in the castle, Annie often chose to cook by herself. In the first month after receiving her salary, she went to the convenience market to buy firewood, butter, salt, and other cooking materials. Every week, she went to the wild to collect some wild fruits and vegetables and cook them every 3 to 5 days. Broken Sword also curiously asked her why she did this, and Annie's answer was very simple. She said that survival in the wild was a skill, and if it was not used for a long time, it would be forgotten after a long time. If it was time to escape again, how could she ensure that she could survive safely? Broken Sword could not understand why Annie was always ready to wander, but then again, it was not bad to taste these wild fruits occasionally. "Good morning." She sat at the table and picked up her share of nuts. "Are you going to the factory today?" Annie nodded and drank the last mouthful of hot soup in the bowl. Some big things can't be pressed out by workers, and the machine can't fit such big things. We can only rely on small pieces of iron to put them together. I heard that Miss Anna used to do it, but now it's all mine." From her voice, Broken Sword could hear a vague sense of satisfaction and accomplishment. This was probably the most significant change for the 4 of them after they came to Neverwinter. Their abilities were no longer meaningless. Working for His Majesty and getting paid was like a craft. This experience of relying on herself instead of cheating or relying on others' charity gave Broken Sword a sense of rebirth. She believed that Annie had the same feeling. Otherwise, she would not get up early every day and be the first to go to the factory without the pressure of survival. But today was a special day. "Don't forget about Hero today, I know." Annie's expression became much more serious. "Don't worry. I'll finish my work over there as soon as possible and come over on time." Broken Sword breathed a sigh of relief. "Well, with you around, she can feel more at ease." "Then I'll go first," she said as she got up. "Go, I'll take care of Hero." "The hot water is in the kitchen. I'll leave the rest to you." Annie didn't say anything else and quickly left the house. After Broken Sword finished her share, she went to the kitchen to get a basin of hot water and walked quietly into the hero's bedroom. Due to the loss of her feet, life was inconvenient. Even if there were enough rooms, She usually slept with Annie. During the day, the three of them would take turns to take care of him. Miss Iffy and Lady Vendy would also come to help. To her surprise, Hero had already woken up. He was leaning against the headboard of the bed, looking out of the window, which was getting brighter and brighter. The soft light shone on her lavender hair and fair face, making her look quiet and pleasant. Just by looking at this scene, it was hard to imagine what kind of cruel treatment she had suffered. However, Broken Sword quickly realized that Hero's mood was probably not as calm as she looked, so she got up much earlier than usual. "Good morning," she said. "Good morning." Hero trembled slightly as if she had recovered from a daze. She said embarrassedly, "I'll have to trouble you again." "What trouble?" Broken Sword stuck out her tongue. "No one will think so. And maybe after today, you'll be able to do it yourself." In an instant, a very complicated look flashed through Hero's eyes. There was nervousness, expectation, fear, and excitement. After a while, she controlled her emotions and smiled reluctantly. "I don't know if I can do it. I've completely forgotten the feeling of walking. Even in my dreams, She bit her lip. "I can only crawl forward." "Then just learn from the beginning. It's no big deal." Broken Sword pressed her shoulder and said, "Even the gods' punishment witches can do it, so can you. Come on, stretch out your legs." Hero took a deep breath and lifted the quilt. She saw a pair of legs that were as thin as firewood. Unlike a few months ago, the legs that had been cut off from the knees had grown a lot longer, almost reaching the ankles. The hideous and ugly scars had also become smooth skin. Although they looked wrinkled and looked like they would break at any moment, they did not look like the legs of a normal person. However, they were much more complete than before. And for this extra half, the Witch Union had put in a lot of effort. In the beginning, Miss Nana could only heal minor injuries such as a broken finger, and she could not regrow a whole limb in any case. It was not until the four witches joined the Witch Union that Miss Nana, in accordance with His Majesty's instructions, tested the strengthened ability of each witch, that there was a delightful breakthrough. With Miss Nana holding Miss Nana's broken sword, the effect of her healing magic was improved comprehensively, and a hound with a broken leg could regrow its claws. This new discovery brought hope to Hero's recovery. But the subsequent experiments found that it was not so easy. First of all, healing only worked on the wound, and Hero's broken leg had already healed. To recover, they had to create an artificial wound. Secondly, even with the magic power of Broken Sword, the healing could only last for dozens of breaths, which meant that the recovery process had to be divided into several stages. The combination of these 2 points was a daunting challenge for both the healer and the one being healed. On one side, they had to repeatedly suffer the pain of a broken leg, and on the other side, they had to make multiple incisions to heal the fracture. Fortunately, Lady Vendy noticed this problem, and then the whole Witch Union took action. For the first time, Broken Sword found that they called each other sisters not just for formality, but they regarded each other as their family. Even though the four of them came from the kingdom of Wolfheart and had just joined Neverwinter, they were not stingy with their concern. Miss Leaf used a special plant called Sleeping Fern to cultivate a herb that could make people unconscious. After taking it, they would be unconscious for several hours, and Hero would not have to suffer any pain. Miss Anna was in charge of the incision. With the sharp black fire, the new wound could be leveled in an instant, and Miss Nana only needed to focus on using her ability. The last one was Lady Spearpassy. As the lord of a city, she did not immediately return to Fallen Dragon Ridge after the meeting because of Broken Sword. The previous treatments could be said to be very careful. Miss Nana's magic power would be exhausted every time she recovered less than half the length of her finger. Once her magic power disappeared, the unhealed severed limb would become a fatal wound, so the effect was extremely slow. It was with the help of Marchioness Spear that the recent treatments made great progress. Chapter 841. After Broken Sword helped her put on protective socks, he carried her to the wheelchair, and then simply washed her face and rinsed her mouth, had breakfast. Ai Me, who was in the next bedroom, also woke up. When everything was ready, the two pushed the wheelchair and walked to the hospital. It could be seen that Hero was much more nervous than usual. She hardly spoke along the way. Fortunately, Amy played the role of livening up the atmosphere, so that the tension would not spread to Broken Sword. As for Amy herself, perhaps optimism was her nature. She could smile at any time, even on the way to the Kingdom of Dawn. This made Broken Sword very envious. It was almost 9 o'clock in the morning when they arrived at the medical center. As soon as they stepped into the courtyard, the three saw Lady Vendi waiting at the door. No, not only Vendi, but also Scroll, Anna, Leaf, Mystery Moon, Lily. Almost all the members of the Witch Union gathered here, waiting for their arrival. Although she was not the one being treated, Broken Sword still felt a sudden surge of warmth from the bottom of her heart. She even felt that her eyes were a little sore. There was a slight tremor in the palm holding the wheelchair. She knew that it was the ups and downs of Hero's mood. His Majesty and Marquis Spear are already waiting for you in the medical room. Vendi came forward with a smile and touched Hero's head. Don't worry, you will soon regain your freedom. His Majesty? Broken Sword was surprised. Is His Majesty here too? Who else could it be? Mystery Moon cried. His Majesty himself can make Lily put down the microscope and those weird insects and follow them here. Don't talk nonsense. Lily yelled and covered her mouth. This made the three could not help but chuckle, and their nervous mood could not help but ease a little. Vendi shook her head helplessly. Let's go. Don't let His Majesty wait too long. Broken Sword pushed the wheelchair into the medical room. After saluting the king and the marquis, she carefully carried Hero to the bed. Just as the latter was about to take the herbs, Annie finally rushed over. She gently held Hero's hand, just like in the past. Until you wake up, I will stay here. This sentence seemed to have incredible magic. Broken Sword saw that the girl on the sickbed finally settled down. During the long escape, it was Annie who helped the three girls, who had no experience in surviving in the wild, to reach the Kingdom of Dawn unscathed. During this process, they all treated Annie as their pillar of support. They believed that as long as she was there, any problem would be easily solved. Not long after swallowing the pill, Hero fell into a deep sleep. Let's begin, Vendi said to Broken Sword. She nodded and closed her eyes. In an instant, her 5 senses disappeared, as if she had been thrown into a void. But this feeling only lasted for a few seconds, and soon she was able to see her surroundings again through Miss Nana's eyes. The experience after using her ability was quite marvelous. She could even see herself as a short and thin dagger, with a green magic power that was full of vitality flowing between the blades. The willow leaf-shaped dagger was His Majesty's suggestion. He said that it was too weird and inconvenient to wield a long sword in front of the sickbed, so it was better to transform it into a short dagger. He also gave this kind of weapon a strange name, scalpel. Suddenly, a more surging magic power rushed into her body, and the feeling of fullness made her moan uncontrollably. Of course, only the little girl holding her could hear this slight moan. Still uncomfortable? Nana held the scalpel in front of her eyes. It's much better than the previous times. Broken Sword took a deep breath, although it was just a subconscious action. After all, the weapon could not breathe. It's okay. I can bear it. You can use it as you like. This powerful magic power came from Leaf. When Spear Passy connected the two of them, this magic power also impacted Broken Sword. Fortunately, Miss Leaf's ability itself had the characteristics of vitality and nourishment, so it was not too uncomfortable after adapting, unlike Anna's black fire, which was hard, sharp and cold, as if her whole body was filled with steel needles. Coupled with the vast capacity of magic power, it was almost unbearable for her. Therefore, when working together with the witches, Miss Anna was the one he worked with the least. After becoming a blade, she could have a certain conscious connection with the user. She also faintly realized that a witch's magic power was not unrelated to her own character. Most witches' temperament could always be felt from the fluctuations of magic power. Therefore, it was very difficult for her to understand why Miss Anna, who seemed approachable, quiet, but extremely intelligent, could give her such a feeling in terms of magic power. Anna took off the hero's socks, and a dark thread suddenly appeared on her fingertips, like a rope, and tied Broken Sword's legs. Broken Sword could not help but shiver. She had seen it with her own eyes. When necessary, this black flame could instantly melt metal and burn everything. But now, it was just like the feeling that the magic power of the other party gave her when they were working together. It was just an incomparably hard and cold thread. The black thread quickly disappeared, and Broken Sword knew that it had shrunk into an imperceptible black spot. In the process of shrinking, the skin, blood vessels, and bones were neatly divided into two. Because the cutting surface was too smooth, it took a while for the wound to gradually show a circle of blood. The cut-off limb was less than a finger thick. Nana used a dagger to pick up the peeled skin and drove her magic to wrap the wound. Broken Sword had seen the following treatment many times. The bloody wound began to grow forward, and pink and tender new skin grew under the old skin. The magic power in their bodies was also rapidly draining. If there was no leaf to continuously replenish them, it would not take long for them to exhaust all their magic power. About half an hour later, a complete pair of feet finally appeared in front of everyone. Nana's spirit had also reached the limit. She almost threw away the scalpel and let go of Broken Sword. She held the edge of the bed and gasped, her forehead covered with tiny beads of sweat. Broken Sword was not much better. For her, the whole process was like constantly inflating her internal organs. Even after restoring her original appearance, her whole body was still sore. The little girl was carried to the next room by Vendi for a rest, but she insisted on staying. She wanted to be the first to see Hero wake up with Annie and Amy. After the sleeping ferns effect faded, Hero slowly opened her eyes. "How is it?" Vendi held her up, sat her against the bed, and asked softly, "Can you feel its existence?" First, she shook her head, as if she wanted to shake off the lingering drowsiness from her mind. Then she widened her eyes and stared at her feet. There was nothing there except for the heart-wrenching scars. Everyone held their breath and cast their eyes on the back of her feet. The medical room was silent for a while. Suddenly, her slender toes trembled slightly. Broken Sword's heart also trembled. She even thought it was her illusion. She blinked and looked again. The toes trembled twice, and then like rusty scissors that had not moved for a long time, they bent jerkily and slowly. Her heart, which had been hanging in suspense, finally fell to the ground. Just as she was about to cheer, she saw two sparkling tears in the corner of Hero's eyes. She could not help but be stunned. Even in the most difficult period, she had never seen Hero cry. Hero choked as soon as she opened her mouth. For a long time, she could not finish the sentence, but everyone present understood what she meant. Thanks. Chapter 842. After returning to the castle, Roland was still feeling a little emotional. As the saying goes, people shed tears of joy. However, from Hero's cry, Roland did not feel all joy. It was as if she had suppressed too much grievance, pain, and criticism in the past, and finally found an outlet to vent. In other words, the strength she showed was not because she ignored the pain, but because she suppressed all the negative emotions in her heart. But this was also a normal reaction. Before the upheaval, Hero was just a girl who had just reached adulthood. It was very rare for her to not be destroyed by the torture and still have hope. The treatment was very successful. Her feet were basically no different from ordinary people. Since he hadn't walked for a long time, it was difficult for him to bend his toes. However, since he could feel this part of his limbs, it meant that his nerves were connected to his spine. After that, as long as he went through rehabilitation training, he would regain the ability to move freely sooner or later. This treatment also made Roland further confirm Broken Sword's ability, which was to improve the witch's critical point. Every witch's ability had its limits. For example, Hummingbird, there were limits to the volume, duration, and degree of weight reduction of the object. Even if one of the conditions was exceeded, the magic power required would increase rapidly, like a jumping index. If the limit was exceeded, the result would be that it could not be achieved. For example, she could not make a mountain as light as a feather, nor could she maintain the effect of weight reduction forever. The reason might be that the magic power needed to do so was probably astronomical. The same was true for Nana. Regrowing severed limbs was probably far beyond the critical point of her ability. Therefore, although she could recover her exploded fingers, she could not recover her limbs, even with the help of Leaf. Broken Sword was equivalent to expanding this limit, making things that were impossible before become something that could barely be achieved. And the original method of using magic power became an ability that could be used many times. He took out a stack of reports from the drawer and spread them on the table. They were the test records of Vendi's integration of Broken Sword and the other witches. It could be seen that most of the witches' abilities had been significantly enhanced. The exponential growth was amazing, but the reverse was also very beneficial. For example, the Enchanted Dawn I could last from 5 days to half a month. Before Neverwinter had the ability to generate electricity on a large scale, this improvement was very valuable. After all, as more and more factories were built, electricity for lighting had gradually become the bottleneck of production. Also, Candlelight's solidified state could be maintained for a longer time under the buff of Broken Sword. This was greatly beneficial to the machine tool's service life and processing level. If it weren't for her ability and there were so many newbies crammed into the factory, it wouldn't be surprising for a dozen boring tools or 2 or 3 machines to be scrapped every day. Apart from that, Soroya, Agatha, Lucia, Paper, and other witches who were active in the production line were also beneficiaries of Broken Sword. The industrial level of Neverwinter was rising too fast. Many of the supporting systems and manpower were not in place. It was only thanks to the witches that the industry did not collapse. Otherwise, with such crude production methods, it would not be news for them to stop work every 2 days and explode every 3 days. Now that he had the Broken Sword, this part was even more stable. Roland wrote his deduction at the end of the report. It was foreseeable that Broken Sword would become one of the busiest witches in Neverwinter in the future. In the afternoon, Xiaoan walked into his office. "Your Majesty, the Minister of Chemical Industry, Sir Kyle, wants you to go to lab number 4. He said that he has some clues about what you asked." Roland's eyes lit up. "Arrange the itinerary. I'll leave right away." "Yes, Your Majesty." Accompanied by a team of guards, Roland arrived at lab number 4. With the establishment of the acid plant and the nitration plant, the simple bungalow, which was originally a small workshop, had become a real research site in Neverwinter. These buildings located beside the Redwater River were not only separated by walls, but also equipped with guards and logistics. Even the houses had been redecorated. The outer walls were painted beige, which made them look much more dignified. Kyle Sichi did not greet him at the door. Only Deputy Minister Chavez stood alone in front of the door, looking a little embarrassed. Roland had long known the temperament of the chief alchemist. He waved his hand and went straight into the room. Kyle was attentively guarding the long table, watching the liquid in the condensing tube drip into a glass. The liquid was as clear as amber, and when he got closer he could smell a familiar and nostalgic smell. Around it there were several other glasses, and the liquid inside seemed to be different, from shallow to deep. Roland could not help but take a deep breath. He had not smelled the fragrance of gasoline for a long time. Of course, it was not appropriate to call this crude product gasoline. It was very different from the large-scale car fuel used in the future, but it had the same smell. It was not possible to use it as a stable energy source in a short time. "Your Majesty," the chief alchemist noticed him at this time. He put his hand on his chest and saluted. "You're right. The Blackwater in the southernmost region is indeed composed of a variety of liquids. I've done several experiments according to the method in intermediate chemistry, and found that they can be separated one by distillation." He pointed to the glass on the table. "If you further separate them, their composition seems to be almost the same." "Almost the same is right," Roland said carelessly. "These things were all hydrocarbons. If Lucia were to decompose them, they would all end up the same." "Anything else?" "They can all be burned, and the higher the level, the more violent the liquid will be. For example, this." He raised the amber glass and shook it. When ignited, it's like an explosion. Your Majesty, are you going to use it to make more powerful explosives? Looking at the excited old alchemist, Roland could not help but chuckle in his heart. When he saw something that could burn, he thought of explosives. He already had the necessary qualities to be a real chemist. In fact, the Blackwater was a sample taken from the Endless Cape. From the very beginning, he had suspected that the everlasting underground fire was caused by the eruption of oil wells. The so-called oil was actually a huge family. As the blood of modern industry and the strategic material that determined the direction of the World War, he naturally knew about it. In fact, the difference between the oil collected from the eastern continent and the oil collected from the western continent was much greater than the color of the skin. It was not wrong to say that they were completely different liquids. Their colors ranged from golden yellow and dark green to black, brownish red, and even transparent. They were gorgeous and gorgeous. Some could flow like water, some were extremely viscous, some could not be directly ignited, but some could easily burn. In terms of composition, as long as it was a hydrocarbon composed of hydrogen and carbon, it could be put into the frame of oil after being mixed together. Therefore, it was not strange that the Blackwater was classified as oil. Chapter 843. However, it was quite rare for the Blackwater to converge into an underground Styx in the southernmost region. According to Iron Axe's report, from the Choke Swamp to the Endless Cape, the viscosity of the Styx was constantly decreasing, and the density of the dead fog was getting thinner and thinner. The Blackwater Valley was the intersection of several Styx rivers. Standing on a high place in the valley, one could even hear the dull roar of the Blackwater under their feet. Roland speculated that the Styx was constantly changing its composition as it flowed. For example, the dead fog described in the report was probably a kind of poisonous gas emitted by the Blackwater itself, or the result of the reaction between the Blackwater and some underground substances. This might explain why the Blackwater Valley had not been turned into a huge brazier by lightning or arson after hundreds of years of evolution, and why the Choke Swamp was rumored to be fatal. The dead fog covering the Styx not only hindered the Sand Nation, but also isolated the air, so the Blackwater could flow steadily to the south. At the Endless Cape, the underground Styx was nowhere to be found, and only a small part of it would spurt out of the ground due to the pressure. Some of it formed a burning column of fire, while others turned into thin streams and shallow pools. At this time, the Blackwater no longer had the suffocating dead fog, so it was suitable for mining. In the face of such a strange crude oil, Roland did not know how many kinds of oil it could be decomposed into. He could only ask the chief alchemist to test it first, and then plan the next step after getting the result. Now, from the sample separation, the result was quite exciting. The Blackwater can indeed be used to make terrible weapons, but it has far more uses than that. Roland answered Kyle's question while picking up the glass and looking at it carefully. Just the high calorific value of the Blackwater alone shows that there is a lot of room for improvement. You will find out later. For the straightforward chief alchemist, using unknown new things to keep him in suspense was the best way to motivate him. Seeing Kyle's dissatisfied look, Roland secretly smiled. Let's talk about the experiment. If you really want to use the Blackwater, it won't be enough to rely on a few flasks and condensing tubes. Just like the production of diacid, you have to find a way to produce it on a large scale. The principle of petroleum separation was very simple. It could almost be regarded as the most basic chemical knowledge. Through heating, the petroleum was turned into steam, which was then introduced into the fractionating tower. Using the different boiling points of the various oils in the mixed liquid, the fractionating tower condensed them in turn. Thus, gasoline, kerosene, diesel, heavy oil, and other finished products were produced. This process was completely a physical change, so it was easy to do under experimental conditions. Although there were more and more refining techniques, and the efficiency of crude oil utilization had also increased significantly, the most classical distillation separation method was still effective. In a situation where production costs were not important, it was naturally the first choice. It was just that when any process was enlarged, its complexity would increase exponentially. If one wanted to carry out industrial fractionation, there would inevitably be many more things to consider. Kyle Sichi should have a deep understanding of this. The old alchemist stroked his beard and said, "Well, I'll have to think about it for a few more days. In addition, I need the help of the Witch Union." Taking the initiative to use the witch's power to conduct scientific experiments was a very good sign. Roland nodded. "If you have any requests, send someone to tell me. I will arrange it." "Thank you, Your Majesty." Kyle rolled his eyes. "In addition, I have a small request." "Oh? What is it?" "When you use them to make new things, can you let me have a look?" Kyle could not suppress his curiosity. In theory, for the sake of confidentiality, this request was out of line, just like an engineer in charge of extracting uranium or wanted to know the entire Manhattan Project. However, after a short consideration, Roland agreed. After all, this could increase his enthusiasm for work, and at the same time, there were no rivals in this era who could compete with Neverwinter in terms of technology. "Then you have to work hard." He pointed to the cups of distilled liquid and said, "The sooner you produce them, the sooner you will know the answer." "Wait, do you need all of them?" Kyle was surprised. Although they can all be used to burn, the black water produced from the lower layer is probably not as good as snow powder. The smoke is very strong, and the fire is not strong. It will choke people to use it to light a lamp. This guy is still thinking about the explosives and regards the inactive oil and residue as waste, Roland thought. Indeed, the light oil in the upper layer will burn more fiercely, but it is much more difficult to use. In the absence of additives, a slight carelessness will cause an explosion, which is not something that can be achieved in a short time. Instead, he preferred the diesel and heavy oil in the lower layer. The former was an excellent fuel for internal combustion engines, which could be used even if the technology was not up to standard and it was mixed with impurities. At most, it would emit black smoke and pollute the environment, which was not a problem at present. Heavy oil was the first choice for steam-powered ships, which was very important for navigation. After all, the efficiency of burning coal was too low. It was not a problem for it to run in the inland rivers, but it was a little difficult for it to run from the fjords to the shoal of the western region. This was one of the reasons why Roland built the festive harbor at the Endless Cape, to provide supplies for the steam-powered ships on the route. As for crossing the Sealine and entering the depths of the ocean, it was necessary to burn oil. At the same time, it was also the one with the lowest requirements for secondary treatment. It could be used as soon as it was separated, even if it was mixed with asphalt residue. It was the least particular fuel among the petroleum families. Of course, Roland would not tell Kyle about this in advance. He was not sure whether it would work before he produced the finished product. If he made it sound as if it was true, only to find out in the end that it was not true, it would damage his omniscient image. Therefore, he just shrugged and said, "All the oil, including the residue and debris left at the bottom, should be collected separately. I'll keep them for my own use." "Yes, Your Majesty," the chief alchemist said with his hand on his chest. By the way, Roland stopped at the door of the laboratory, turned around and said, "Start a tutorial class." What? Kyle was stunned. "When I held the agricultural conference last time, didn't I say we should offer an agricultural course in secondary education? That way, even if we promote Golden Twos to the whole country, there will be enough people to carry it out." Roland explained, "Also, we need more skilled workers to open a new factory. Many people want to devote themselves to the chemical industry after they graduate from universal education. Let's gather them together and train them first, so that they won't panic and cause accidents when they enter the factory." This was equivalent to dividing students' majors into different subjects in the middle school. Roland had long considered that since he did not have the time to train all-rounders, he should start training professional workers as soon as possible. "Your Majesty shouldn't Lady Scroll be responsible for this? She's responsible for recruiting, dividing students into classes, assessing them, and paying them. But the Ministry of Chemical Industry, which is you, has to provide the tutors." "You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.